Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
In her father's spacious office with heavy dark wood furniture sat only 3 people. Emily, her younger brother Michael, and James Smith, notary. Emily knew that one day her beloved parents' lives would be cut short, but she didn't think her father would be gone just 2 years after her gravely ill mother. Robert was blighted by his heart. After burying his spouse, he constantly complained of chest pain, and then he had a heart attack. Emily's father was a businessman and had several branches of his trading firms around the county. He was known to many people, and the children did not need anything. But this statement is only half true. Michael's parents loved him more. They supported him from an early age, encouraged any endeavor, and did not strictly punish. Only Emily all her childhood heard, "You're a girl. You need to be more modest," Robert told his daughter. "When you look good, everyone looks in the mirror. Think of what she'll say." "Daughter is not a boy. We need to keep her safe," her mother told Emily with a soft reproach. "She's not our type. Michael brings home people he's just met all the time. You don't need to keep an eye on Michael," her mother said sternly. That's what Dad and I are for. Emily always felt like she wasn't good enough for her parents, no matter how diligently she studied, no matter what prizes she won for her extracurricular activities, no matter how malleable she was. Michael had always been more important to Mom and Dad. They allowed him many things they would never have allowed their daughter. But despite the frequent injustices, Emily thought that her father would definitely divide the property equally among his children in the event of his death. Only James Smith didn't make her happy. "To you, Emily," the notary muttered in his voice. "Robert bequeathed to marry John Thompson, a farmer. He resides in Springfield Township on Main Street, in house number 17. James Smith read the will with complete confidence. But Emily still thought the man was joking. "And what does that mean?" She smiled tensely. "Did you make that up on the fly?" "You know, it's absolutely not funny to me." "Michael," she turned to her brother. "Is that even normal? It sounds stupid." He nodded. "No, Emily, you haven't misheard. This is your father's last will and testament." "What's the joke here?" "It says so in a certified document. I'm a professional. I don't engage in such nonsense as a practical joke." "Then what does my father's will leave me?" "If he's decided to marry me off to some country laborer, we could use the funds. You dispose of what you have in your bank account. All of Robert's assets and savings, as well as the management of the business, go to Michael." "Whoops," Michael Hale shrieked, unable to believe his good fortune. "But how can that be?" whispered a shocked Emily. "Why is it like this? What did I do to deserve this?" "No, I don't believe it. This is some kind of delusion, sis. You're screwed." Michael was clearly having fun. "Well, good thing I was born a man and no one is forcing me into marriage, and I'll be in charge of the business from now on." "Thank you. My father didn't shower me with his favor." Emily genuinely didn't understand why her father had made that particular decision. Michael knew nothing of his father's last will and testament. He had been so naturally surprised that he now sat with a silly smile. Wow, what a stroke of luck for a fool. Emily had never thought of her brother as shallow. But he was clearly not interested in the family's affairs. He studied poorly in the firm, where his father gave him a position, did not appear. Michael liked only to get money from the profits, but not to work for the good of the company. Emily hurriedly left her father's office. She could not breathe. Tears choked her. She quickly passed the stairs and locked herself in her room. Sobs and sobbing could be heard. How could Daddy do this to her? How she wished she could talk to her father now, prove that she too was worthy of his attention and support. Emily would do well in a leadership position. After all, that's what she went to university for, to be a favor to the faculty. But what could Michael do for his business? He'd just loot it. He didn't even know what his future responsibilities were. The employees will definitely cry from such an inexperienced boss. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the room. Emily reluctantly got up and opened the door for her brother. "It's all in vain," he said, instead of words of encouragement. "You have to trust your father. He would clearly not wish you ill. Surely your fate was not decided for you. Why are you here? To mock?" Emily looked at her brother unhappily. They'd never really been friends, but they'd never had a big fight. Emily and Michael had always had 2 different interests. "Either way, you have to act on your father's will," Michael stated with such arrogance as if he thought he was her late father. "What do you think? I'm in your power now. You think you can control me." "This house is mine now," Michael told her with undisguised pleasure. "You better listen to my advice and you'll be fine too." Emily was amazed at the quick change in her brother's demeanor. People like that definitely shouldn't be given power, because they'd start abusing it. Emily couldn't sleep. All sorts of thoughts kept her awake. How could she accept the fact that her father had deprived her of her will? She had a good education. She could take care of herself at 27. But it's like her dad cut her out of the family. Why would he pick some poor man from the town to marry her? As crazy as the idea was, Emily decided she had to at least meet this John. She couldn't wait to find out how he and her father knew each other and what John had to gain from marrying her. Whatever the case, Emily decided she wasn't just going to give up. She would figure it all out. Maybe the will was fake, since the entire family fortune had gone to Michael alone. He could have had a hand in it. She doubted her brother could have done such a thing on his own. No, there was no need to suspect the only family member she had left, but would he treat her as an equal now? The next morning, immediately after breakfast, Emily contacted James Smith. "Good morning," she addressed the now familiar notary on the receiver. "Can you give me that John's contacts in the will?" "Good morning, Emily Robertovna. Have you made up your mind after all?" he inquired. "Nothing's decided yet, but I must at least understand what's going on at all. I don't believe my father could do this to me. I've known Robert Viktorovich for years, and he wouldn't do anything for nothing," he repeated in syllables. "You made a sensible decision." Calming down a bit after the intriguing remark, Emily dialed the right number, and after only a few beeps she heard a pleasant male voice. "Yes, who am I speaking to?" "Hello, this is Emily Ignatova. Does my name mean anything to you?" "Pretty much, yes," the man agreed stoically. "Didn't think I'd be contacted. Figured it was a prank. I was also, shocked by the news of my marriage to you. Would it be convenient for you if I stopped by today? I don't want to discuss something like this over the phone." "Of course, not until after 4. I'm at work until then," John agreed. Emily didn't know what to expect, but bravely headed into the township. She imagined what the man her father had chosen to be her husband must look like, but she couldn't focus. She pulled up to John's house at 5:30 in the evening, taking a bag of brownies from the back seat. Emily figured a little hospitality would help her feel more confident. She entered the yard through an unlocked gate. John's house was red brick and clearly hid at least 4 rooms inside. There were outbuildings in the yard, and the grounds appeared well maintained. Paths led to the front door. An 8-year-old girl responded to the knock, noticing a stranger on the doorstep. "Daddy, there's an aunt here to see you," she shouted and promptly disappeared. "Hi," Emily said hello. To her, limping, came John out of the room, followed by 2 boys about 10 years old. The kids looked at the visitor curiously. "Go to the nursery," said their father to them in a calm tone. Those obeyed the first time. "Hello, come in, please." Emily noted that John was not much older than she was. He was 32 at most, and he already had 3 children. Could all of them really be his? John invited his guest into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and gratefully accepted the bag of cakes. He called Nastia over and gave her a plate of sweets. "How did you know my father? Is he indebted to you? I don't see why I am obliged to marry you. You must admit it's silly. We are, after all, complete strangers." "It's a strange situation," John agreed, for some reason not looking her in the eye. "I've never met your father personally, but I had a visit from his notary recently. A couple months ago, he said my name was mentioned in a certain businessman's will for marrying his daughter, but he didn't mention the amount in the bank. Now I realized it was about you. I didn't refuse in my position, so it's okay for you to enter into a marriage of convenience." Emily was even a little upset. She'd hoped John would be more honorable. She wanted to believe that her father had chosen for her, albeit simple, a worthy man to be her life partner. "I am as puzzled as you are, but I did not grow up well off. I have 3 children on me now. I am a single father. Sarah, my late wife, died while giving birth to Tim and Tina. When we found out we were having twins, we were beyond happy. And then I became both a father and a widower overnight. So the offer to get married and get paid for it with money I'll never earn sounds very tempting." John stirred his tea in his mug with a spoon and drank a little. "My mom helps me, but she's not doing well at all right now. She needs expensive medication to keep her stable, but I can only afford the cheap analogs, and they aren't as effective." Emily sighed. She realized that her problems weren't even close to John's. He dealt with a lot of hardships every day, but he wasn't discouraged. If she were him, she wouldn't turn down a lucrative offer to get rich either. "Danny has a heart defect, but that was recently discovered. Turns out it doesn't just happen congenitally," John shared in an all-too-sad voice. "I don't know how I'm going to take it all. And about a month ago, I got in a car accident because of some idiot. Now I'm limping. which doesn't help the job at all. Tractor driver, though in demand in our town, is a pretty stressful job, isn't it? You know, I can't promise that I'll listen to my father and do as he wrote in his will, but I really wish you could get the money you were promised. I know they will make your life very easy, but you must understand me too. I am destined to marry a man I know absolutely nothing about. We may see each other periodically, get to know each other. I don't know what will come of it." Emily shrugged. She didn't linger in her visit. The children rushed out of the room to see her off. They were curious as to who their guest was. John did not hide anything from the children and tried to explain to them all the difficulties they had to face. For several days, Emily did not contact John in any way, thinking about what to do next. After her father's funeral, she had not often crossed paths with any of her friends. They did not hurry to get into her problems and comfort her. Michael, on the other hand, was in a tizzy. "What is this?" "You showed up drunk again," Emily scolded at her brother, dragging him to the couch in the living room on the first floor. "And how could you be put in charge of everything? Why don't you have to mourn your father anymore? You've gone rogue," she resented him. "Know your place," Michael muttered unintelligibly. "I'm the boss now. I can kick you out." Actually, Emily didn't take her drunken brother's words seriously. He'd always thought highly of himself. No wonder he'd gotten cocky. Being alone with Michael was getting harder and harder. He was constantly teasing Emily about the fact that her father had left her nothing, that she was going to be a mother to his entire brood again. "You're such a jerk." Emily's eyes sparkled. Picking up the bags of gifts she'd bought for John's children, she'd already visited them twice and remained in good spirits after her visit. They were just socializing more, not bringing up the marriage or their difference in status. Emily was offended by Michael's jokes. As she enjoyed spending time with John, he didn't try to develop their relationship in any way to get married and get rich. John appeared calm, well-mannered, and also, to Emily's surprise, easy to handle with his boys. "I wonder how you manage to be a wonderful father," she said with a smile as she watched the children sit at the round kitchen table and diligently trace numbers and letters in their notebooks. "It's hard, but you have to be strict as well as understanding. Now that mom can't help me. I'm even more imbued with their little problems. It's important to listen to your child. He trusts you more too, my little ones. He knows how hard money comes. Realizes I can't always keep them entertained." "Yeah, they're not cranky at all," Emily confirmed. "I wasn't treated like that when I was a kid," she sighed and suggested John go outside for a while. "Well, those neighborhoods, I don't get out of town much, and it's so peaceful here," John eagerly replied and waved to the children. "So what were your parents busy doing?" Since they weren't paying attention, they weren't bad people. But my little brother always came first for them. They forgave him everything, supported him, entertained him, and I always managed on my own. Offensive? Yes, and unfair to the child, but you seem to have grown up to be a good person. You're sensitive, caring. I don't think your brother has those qualities. John briefly put his hand on Emily's back in a supportive gesture, but she was very pleased and excited. She liked him more and more with each meeting. But Emily was afraid to admit it. She felt at ease with him and didn't even want to go back to the city. "Stay with us for dinner. It's a sincere request. The children adore you, and not just for the presents," John said with a smile. "Oh, and I wouldn't mind spending more time in your company. I don't have many friends right now. And you know, you give off such a warmth. I feel like I've known you for a long time." "Me too," Emily admitted, lowering her head. John stopped suddenly. He took her hand and looked into her eyes. In that instant, everything became clear to both of them. Since then, Emily had taken more and more work from home. She didn't work for any of the firms Michael now ran, but her bosses were just as successful. The position allowed her to stay out of the office for a few days, which she took advantage of. Emily spent a lot of time with John's family and began to bond with Sarah, his mother. Well, it won't be long before the wedding, they teased, watching the pleasure Emily took in setting the table for the children's return from school. "You say that too," Emily waved it off. She thought her father was right. The feeling between her and John grew stronger every day. They were no longer apart for 4 months. They went to see each other all the time, but they couldn't stand it any longer. "We need to get married and live together," John said simply when left alone with his lover. "See how it all happened?" "And you were worried?" Emily replied surprisingly with a quiet laugh so as not to disturb the children playing in the next room. "And you'll be able to pay for your loved one's surgeries." "That's not why I'm suggesting it," John immediately retorted. "I'm not accusing you. I wonder how much is in there. I hope my father didn't hurt you with the payment. He had a reason for rewarding you like that." "He rewarded me with you." John smiled and kissed his bride. Emily had little contact with her brother. She'd moved to Springfield Township and drove into town twice a week to appear at the office in front of her bosses. Two close friends, learning of the changes in Emily's personal life, were surprised, but at the wedding agreed to come. The bride and groom decided to play in Springfield. While the weather is good, they invited only the people closest to them. And I forgot about that. Michael smirked when his sister stopped by his workplace to call him personally. I thought you'd be smart enough not to indulge your father's unbelievable desires. I mean, he was old. So he made up this absurdity. He was out of his mind, but he was right. John's a good man. Better than some of the people who've been trying to make friends with me around here. I don't know if I'm coming or not, but I'll think about it, Michael said with a smug look. I don't have much time for fun anymore. You know, I can't figure out what's what. They want something from me all the time. Emily was hurt that her only family man couldn't spare at least a day for her sake. She assumed that Michael couldn't handle what their father had put on him, and in her heart she was even a little jubilant about it. Only Michael's policies were quickly bankrupting the firm, and Emily was well aware of that. At a modest outdoor wedding party attended by no more than 40 people, Emily and John sat surrounded by children at a separate table decorated with flowers. Guests were seated at two long tables on either side of them, and in the center was a space for dancing. It's a lot of fun here, Sarah, in a soft pink dress, jumped up to the newlyweds. She has brave eyes. Emily stroked her head as she felt her husband take her hand. We did good, didn't we? John whispered in her ear, looking around at the satisfied guests. You're right. It's just a shame Michael didn't show up, and then, as if on cue, an expensive car pulled up in front of the gate, and Michael walked toward the open gate. He moved with a shaky gait. Emily immediately got up from her seat. Do you know why that guy married my sister? Because of the money. He's a con man. He's hardly a man. Shut up right now, his sister shouted at him. John was on his way to quiet the troublemaker. You're blind because you're in love. He's going to get a lot of money because of the wedding, by the way. John grabbed Michael by the arms and dragged him outside. The driver helped shove him into the back seat and drove him away. The guests watched with open mouths as the show unfolded and began to discuss what they had seen. Despite the humiliation, John took his seat next to his wife. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd get so drunk. It's not your fault, John said through gritted teeth. But how did he know about the money? No one but the notary could know. Emily was angry with her brother, but she was glad that now John would be able to receive the payment. When the couple went to the bank, they were surprised by the generous amounts left behind by Robert Smith. I didn't think Daddy would go to such lengths, Emily said, still in disbelief. I thought he'd give me about this much in his will. He thought very highly of you, John teased her. But you can breathe, Emily patted her husband's shoulder. There should be enough here for Tim's checkup and treatment, and Sarah will get the medicine she needs. I think it might even be enough to fix up the house. Or a new one? Yay, thanks for being in my life. John hugged his wife right in the bank, not shying away from the specialist who was talking to them. I'm happy to have you. And I'm grateful to your father. Tim was worried, visiting numerous doctors with his dad and mom. Emily was glad that her lover's children accepted her quickly and didn't try to break them up. They called her mom easily. No one had asked them to. Don't be afraid, little one, Emily comforted Tim. You're in good hands. This hospital has the best doctors in the world. They'll take good care of you. And Daddy and I will be right here with you. Before you know it, you'll be back from surgery. Mommy's right, son. John leaned toward him. Okay, Tim agreed, squeezing his parents' hands. I'll be brave. Tim was welcomed home as a hero after the successful operation. Sarah could not visit her grandchildren in the hospital because of her condition, but after a few days of taking the necessary medication, she felt much better. You were sent to us by fate, she repeated to Emily with tears in her eyes. Everything has changed with you. My son is happy now. We're getting better. I'm glad, Emily replied with a happy smile. She and John decided what they would spend the rest of the money from their father's allowance on. Life went on as usual. Old grudges were being forgotten. Emily's horrible behavior had taken a back seat to Michael's horrible behavior. But she still wondered why her father had chosen to associate her with John. How did he know him? Why did he feel the need to bring them together? Doesn't it bother you anymore? She asked John before she went to bed, when he'd already kissed her and snuggled up next to her with his eyes closed. It's weird, but there's no one to ask now. You're right, but maybe we should investigate, Emily insisted. Hire a detective, for example. We should check with James Smith. He's sure to know someone. I agree. John stood up and looked at her carefully. Money doesn't just fall out of the sky. There must be a reason. We can't be related. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been told to get married. Then what? I don't know what I could have done to please your father to reward me like this. Out of all the men in town worthy of you, he chose a lame tractor driver, a widower with a sick mother and 3 children. With all that, I doubt he loved you. But he was right. What made us meet? Oh yeah, it's like Dad knew how things would turn out, Emily said thoughtfully. Tomorrow I'll get the detective's contact information and make arrangements with him. I won't rest until I know the truth. Robert, whose contacts shared with Emily James Smith, turned out to be clever and favorably met with Emily. I did not know that he worked only for his own benefit and did not respect the confidentiality of the information received. Previously, his services were also used by Michael. Only Robert didn't warn Emily about it. I have a difficult job, you know, so I take a lot, the detective warned at once. Of course, I understand. I need to know something about the past of my husband and father. Robert brightened up immediately. What, you suspect your spouse of adultery or collusion? I've seen a lot of things in my job, so feel free to speak openly. No, my husband is faithful to me. I know that for a fact. That's not what this is about. After telling Robert the whole story, Emily drove home. She was anxious to hear the results, even though Robert didn't inspire confidence. How did you like him? John asked, meeting his wife at the stove. Sarah was helping her son chop salads. He was strange, like he was trying to get all the information out of me. But despite Emily's skepticism, Robert was ready to provide the data in a week. They met at the cafe. They took a far table so as not to draw attention to themselves. The thing is, Emily, your father and your husband's father were close friends. They started a business together from scratch and did the impossible to get it going. At that time, there was no shortage of criminal elements offering protection to promising businessmen. Your father agreed to pay them off with some money. Tom Adams, John Thompson's father, didn't indulge them out of carelessness. He upset an important man who began to harass his family. Tom Adams was afraid of reprisals, so he ran away. His wife was the first to die. Then he decided to hide his infant son with Sarah, whom your husband considers his birth mother. She raised him and never told a living soul where the child came from. Wow, Emily gasped. She was angry with her father, but she hadn't thought his story would be so sad and noble. So Dad was just helping a friend who was in trouble. And if John's parents had stayed alive, he would have grown up to be a completely different person. Wouldn't have faced so many hardships. Exactly, nodded Robert Smith. Tom Adams had left his entire fortune in his son's name and hoped that one day he would have it. He asked Robert Smith to bring their children together as a token of friendship. It's amazing that you really fell in love with each other and decided to get married. I often deal with family secrets, but this one struck me. It's nice to know that it's based on great friendship and not greed. Robert Smith said it in a tone as if he didn't believe it himself. He's definitely a professional, Emily thought. He knew exactly what his customers wanted to hear from him, though it didn't seem as if Robert Smith held the same high moral values. Thank you for your work. You've really helped me out a lot, Emily expressed. She was genuinely grateful, but decided she wouldn't be using his services again. The second installment of payment is in this envelope. Have a nice day. John was shocked by what he heard from his spouse. He asked his mother to confirm the private investigator's words. I couldn't tell you. I was taken at my word, Sarah apologized. Forgive me, my boy. I raised you as my own. For I always wanted a son, but God did not bestow one mom. It's not your fault, John hugged her. You gave your all to raising me, and you're still helping. I'm so glad I have 3 grandchildren. It's such a treasure. There will be a 4th soon, Emily interjected with a smile at the mother and son's conversation. I wanted to tell you right away, but this investigation, Emily, John whispered with such awe that the women's eyes immediately filled with tears. We're having a baby, I can't believe it. The couple embraced, and Sarah's hands reached for her sister-in-law's still obscure belly. Oh, young people, well done. Congratulations to you. It's a good thing we have enough rooms for so many kids. Emily felt serene in her life once again. She was living in a happy marriage with loving relatives under one roof. She was preparing to become a mom, and all her thoughts were occupied only with this wonderful event. Emily let go of her resentment towards her father after recognizing his motives. He had never forgotten about her. He believed she would be happy with John, and they would have enough money for the family. At some point over the course of a few days, Emily began to be harassed on social media by friends, her parents, and acquaintances. Well, they're poking their noses into my business again, John sighed, seeing his wife's frustrated face. It's getting to be annoying. It's okay. Michael doesn't keep his mouth shut. I don't understand why he suddenly decided to mess with me. He almost got his ass handed to him after his drunken stunt at the wedding. Now he's telling everyone he meets how he decided to marry me off to his friend's son, making it look like I married you so I wouldn't be disinherited. How did he even know about the money in my account? Does he really come from the bank? He's been laughing at me from the beginning. Dad left him everything. And he bequeathed me a fiancée, I suppose. I guess he found out how much you got in his will, and now he's feeling sorry for you. But the thing is, it's not our father's money. It's yours. He has nothing to do with it. How would he know about it? He has no right to claim them. Emily was angry, raising her voice with each new word. Honey, don't get worked up over this idiot, John reassured her. Our baby doesn't need any extra excitement. God be with him, Michael. I've shut up all the nosy people who text you, and you don't open any more of their messages. John was angry about Michael's defiant behavior. He didn't understand why a man who had inherited the entire fortune of his deceased parents was clinging to his sister like this. Wasn't it enough for him what he had gotten? No, John would not allow his wife to be bullied, especially in this position. He was sick of seeing Emily upset. That evening, John rang the bell at the huge gate of Emily's ancestral home, where Michael now lived in proud solitude. What do you want? Came a mocking voice from the intercom. I'm not giving you alms. You have plenty of money of your own. As it turns out, come out. We need to talk, John insisted. Or can you only hide? Leave my family alone. Emily is pregnant, and she has absolutely no use for your bullying. Wow, you've already hit your fourth, Michael said snidely. So I'm a great uncle. You're not going near my kids. And forget about your sister. You don't want to sick inappropriate people on her, writing nasty things to her. For your information, my inheritance has nothing to do with your family's money. It came from my own father. Yeah, I know the house. So, the private investigator didn't tell me about your little investigation. Then why do you want it? You don't have enough thrills in your life. Then I'm going to disappoint you again. Emily Ann No Walls will help you. She was pleased that her husband was standing up for her. But Emily didn't want Michael to get back at him for threatening her. Turns out I didn't know my brother very well all this time. He used to get in trouble with my parents, and it was like I didn't exist to him. Now he was bored. He's got a hold on me, Emily said bitterly. Feeling the safe embrace of her husband, it's better not to touch him. He'll get over it and leave me alone. But you suffer for it, don't you? No, I won't let him bully me, John said indignantly. Who gave him the right to harass you? He has his life, we have ours. Keep him out of ours. Michael might retaliate because you hurt his feelings. I mean, he's a coward. You've exposed him for what he is. Emily's fears were confirmed when her neighbor Lisa called her the next day. What's going on? Your John was just picked up by the cops, rounded up on the spot, no explanation. All he did was yell that he didn't kill anyone. Didn't kill anyone. Emily repeated. Her inside snapped. What had happened? She immediately hung up, forgetting to thank Lisa, and started calling her husband. But take it. Emily angrily paced restlessly around the room. What's wrong? Sarah came to her. My girl, why are you so excited? Has John been taken to the police? I don't understand. He's not answering his cell phone. I'm going to go to the farm. I've got to find out. You'd better sit down. We'll get to the bottom of this. Sarah led her sister-in-law over to the sofa and pushed her shoulders down. Don't fuss, dear. If it's serious, they'll tell us. The local precinct officer didn't know anything about John's affairs. But soon Emily got a call. There's been an attempted assassination attempt on your Michael tonight. He's in a coma now, so he can't tell us anything. Your husband is the only suspect, the policeman's voice explained. You're out of your mind. Why would John do that? He was home all night, went to work as usual. Nothing suspicious, Emily insisted. We'll bring you in for questioning. Can I talk to him? She asked hopefully. Emily still couldn't believe that something terrible was happening to their family again. Could you come over after 2? John Thompson is in the detention center right now, waiting to be questioned. Emily and Sarah choked back tears of helplessness and fear. They didn't know how to talk about what had happened. The kids are probably all ready. The whole town of Springfield knew what John had been accused of. You can't hide something like that. Sarah stayed at home, waiting for her grandchildren to come home from school, while Emily went into town. Now don't drive too fast on the road, my daughter. Her mother-in-law adjusted the light scarf around her neck. Everything's going to be okay. It just needs to be sorted out. I'll call you as soon as there's news, Emily promised, and set off. She held on for a long time. The hardship she had endured, the coldness of her parents as a child had hardened her. Emily could hardly be called a crier, but when she saw John in handcuffs, tears came uncontrollably from her eyes. And remember, no touching, the policeman repeated to her, leaving the couple alone in the conference room. Honey, how are you doing? Did you get hurt? No, don't worry. I've got normal guys in the cell with me. Harmless thieves, drunks, no dangerous criminals. What happened? I haven't seen Michael yet. They say he's in a coma. At first I thought he was setting something up to teach you a lesson. I told you not to go to him. Emily, calm down. I'm nervous too. Your brother was stabbed in his house. The cameras in the yard were off, but I was the last person on the tape. I went to see him yesterday. Only Michael wouldn't come out to me. You know, we talked on the intercom. I've never seen him before. I believe you, honey. I believe you. Emily jerked her hand to touch her husband, but immediately came to her senses. I think it's a coincidence that someone attacked Michael the same night you went to see him. He thinks you have a motive, because our strained relationship with Michael is well known. Somebody could have used that to frame you. That's what I told the investigator. He seems okay. Name's David Johnson. No luck at all this year. Yeah, that car accident that left you limping, and the attempted murder charge. Emily nodded. On the way home, she thought about what her husband had said. He'd been in a car accident after meeting James Smith. Alex said, "The accident was stupid. Not even a rookie driver makes that kind of mistake." But someone still hurt his leg. What if it was intentional? We need to start with Nick Roberts. If he was reporting to Michael about his and John's family business, it seemed like no amount of principle could stop him from telling outsiders. Get the investigator's number. Emily called him as soon as she got home. Good evening, David Johnson. This is Emily Thompson, wife of the dead John Thompson, calling for you. I'm going to drop you the contacts of the private investigator we contacted. Check him out, please. He might know something. Nick Roberts likes to divulge confidential information. Emily spent the rest of the evening with her family. The children snuggled on the bed with her, worrying about their daddy's fate. He'll be released soon. After all, he's not guilty of anything, Emily murmured in a quiet voice before the little ones fell asleep. The police will be sure to check everything out and let him go. That's their job, after all. They're supposed to investigate suspicious events. Mom, do you promise? Danny asked in a sleepy voice, still hesitant to go to his room to sleep. Of course I promise. Dad will come back. Don't worry, Emily answered them, even though she was terribly worried herself. Nick Roberts cracked pretty quickly under questioning. At first he held on, but did not want to go as an accessory to attempted murder. We didn't make a written non-disclosure agreement with Emily Thompson, he said stubbornly at first with an important look. And a verbal agreement is not subject to liability, David Johnson remarked caustically. I'm sure if we do a good digging into your dealings with your customers, we'll find something else you haven't honored. Your services aren't cheap, and new customers will definitely turn away from you if they find out how easily you disclose personal information to third parties. The threat had worked on Nick. He wasn't as tough a nut as he'd made himself out to be. Okay, you don't need to say anything to anyone. He adjusted his jacket. I was approached by Michael Roberts. I didn't realize that information about her husband's life and her sister's life would hurt him so badly. I prefer not to get involved in such stories. I don't want any trouble with criminals. But Michael Roberts himself couldn't hurt himself. David Johnson pressed Nick. So, what are you hiding? There was another man interested in John's fate. You paid me generously and your boundaries of confidentiality have blurred. David couldn't help but snicker. But sort of Nick Roberts began to guffaw. His name was Adam. I haven't looked at his passport. I can't know his last name. But he found out from me all about John's life, about his wife and what she asked me to find out about. Also inquired about the gratuity Emily Thompson's father had left in his account for John should he marry her. This man's name will avail us nothing. Do you remember him well? Will you be able to describe it to our sketch artist for a sketchbook? Sure, anything to help the investigation, Nick replied with a smile. Soon David Johnson had a sketch of the other suspect in the attempt on Michael's life on his hands. Emily was at her brother's hospital when she received a text from the investigator with Adam's portrait. Hello, do you know this man? David Johnson said into the phone. First time I've seen it. Who is it? Emily asked. Everything Nick Roberts told me about Adam. His name is actually Greg Pletner, and he is a third cousin of your husband's late father. They're taking him down to the station right now. I'll let you know as soon as there's any news. Thank you so much, Emily replied cheerfully and hung up the phone. Michael lay in a pile of wires with instruments running around him. Emily was ready to forgive her brother for anything as long as he came to his senses. The next morning, as Emily walked the kids to school, she received a phone call. She picked up the phone immediately without looking at the screen, hoping Robert would give her the good news. Hi, honey, John's satisfied voice came through. I'm being released. The perp's been taken, oh my God, Emily exclaimed and shouted to her mother-in-law. She didn't wait long and was already listening to her son's words over the speakerphone. John, honey, come home soon. We're all packed up here. I'll be home today. Mom, don't worry anymore. I'm out here now, cheerfully. He wanted to scream at how elated he felt. Oh, how I want to kiss you all. Were you frightened, everyone, I guess? Yeah. Especially the kids. I'll pick you up, Emily replied. You do that. I'd like you to come with me to face that creep who calls himself my relative. He almost ruined your brother, didn't he? Michael's a pain. But he didn't deserve that fate. Emily was glad that her husband had a sober assessment of Michael. Even though they weren't good friends, she hadn't given up hope of mending relations with her brother. After all, he no longer had loved ones, and the support of the family in difficult moments he could need. John finally cheered up when he saw his wife. My darling, he pulled her off the ground and hugged her. It's so good to see you. And you, baby, he touched his beloved wife's belly. There you are, reunited. Robert Smith walked up to them. Where's the creep? Emily's face changed immediately, changing from a wide smile to an angry look. Greg Pletner is in his cell right now, so he's the gray-haired man they put in the next cell last night. That's the one. Robert nodded. I suggest we watch his interrogation. Emily and John were allowed to make themselves comfortable in the interrogation room, and the tape was shown to them. Greg looked completely innocuous, average height, fairly elderly, and thin. I never thought a man like that could hurt someone like that, Emily sighed. So you're willing to make a clean confession? Then Robert Smith's voice came over the recording. I am. I'll get a lesser sentence for it, won't I? Greg asked, eager to get out of this at any cost. Receiving assent, he continued. Yeah, I'm the one who tried to kill Michael, but it didn't work. He's in a coma right now, I know. But I didn't want to. I wanted to take him out to frame John. If he went to jail, I'd get his money. After all, I'm the last adult blood relative. What a fool, Robert Smith's young partner replied. But the latter cut him short. For your information, Robert stated, John Thompson had a will in favor of his 3 children. Emily couldn't believe what she was just seeing. This is really stupid. Isn't it? She marveled at Greg's naivete and cruelty. And by the way, he did fake the accident, Robert said to John, but you only got off with a leg injury. Thank you. John shook Robert Smith's hand, hugged Emily, and walked out of the police station with her. I want to forget all of this as soon as possible. After all, we have so much to look forward to back home. John and Emily were greeted with tears and loud children's screams. Children flanked their father on all sides and wouldn't let them pass. Daddy's home. You don't have anything to worry about now. I'm not going anywhere else, I promise, John said, kissing everyone in turn. Emily visited Michael for about a week, and then a miracle happened. He came to his senses after all. Michael coughed, finding a tube in his throat. A doctor, quick, a doctor, yelled a frightened Emily into the hallway as Michael tried to get up. No, calm down, it's okay. You're in the hospital. The paramedics who came running in at the screams quickly calmed Michael down and laid him back down. Welcome to this world, the doctor smiled at him. How are you feeling? Very bright, Michael muttered. I'm thirsty for water. Well. Hello there. Emily walked over to him and touched his arm. You're finally awake. I was worried. Michael looked away and refrained from answering. He now realized how badly he had done wrong to his sister. He had been on a hair's breadth of death after hurting her. Emily still wouldn't turn away from him. I have good news for you, Emily said. Under the table closer to his bed. The perpetrator has been caught. He won't be able to hurt anyone else. I'm sorry, Michael said quietly, not looking her in the eye. I behaved terribly. I didn't deserve your support. I'm glad it's gotten to you. I've already forgiven everything. But remember, I won't tolerate any more bullying attitudes toward me or my family. If you want to keep in touch, please respect my loved ones. Okay, I understand, Michael replied, still avoiding his sister's gaze. After his discharge, he visited Emily's family home and brought many gifts. Let's forget old grudges, John told him on the doorstep, and held out his hand. As soon as Michael shook it, he was immediately enveloped in a hug. And don't spoil me again. The children, Danny and Tina, received Michael warily, but he was able to melt his nephew's hearts with lots of toys and candy. You spoil them, Emily declared with feigned displeasure. She had hoped Michael would change his behavior, but she hadn't expected him to fit into their family so well. When he wasn't looking at everyone with an arrogant stare or making hurtful jokes, Michael seemed quite simple and fun. Uncle Michael. The boys would chase him through all 4 rooms to play hide and seek with him. Just a little more, please, guys. I'm tired already. I'm exhausted. Sarah laughed as she saw her grandchildren corralling her guest. Leave your uncle alone. You don't want him to never come to see you again. Putting all disagreements behind her, Emily enjoyed a peaceful life with her spouse. She had suffered a traumatic experience. It was now more difficult for her to get around due to leg problems, and she was still working remotely, for which John nagged her. Or do you live your life by your job? Maybe you should think about your own business. What do you suggest? Emily sat under her husband's side and rested her head on his shoulder. By the way, Michael mentioned the other day that his firm has a position for you. He realizes that raising 4 will be more difficult now. He really has changed. John smiled, finding common ground with his wife's brother. I'd like my own business, not to go under someone else's authority, even if it's your brother. Especially if it's my brother, Emily corrected her husband. Who knows how much longer Michael will be goody-goody. He might get a kink in his gut. What exactly would you like to do? How about opening a bistro in town? How do you feel about that? Of course, we won't take over until after the baby or baby girl is born. But, by the way, when are we due for an ultrasound? Emily herself had thought about starting her own business that wouldn't depend on her brother, but she was afraid of John's reaction. She didn't think he'd be set on doing something in the city and leaving town life behind. If we get our own business, we'll have to move from here to the city and run everything, won't we? Our employees will definitely need us at all hours of the day and night at first. Otherwise, it won't work out. There's not much keeping me here. We can already look for a spacious house in the city, so we can all fit in. I'll have to check with my mom to see if she wants to live with us or alone. You don't mind if she comes with us? I'm great with her, and she can help with the baby at first, if she wants to, of course. The months leading up to the birth flew by. By then, the couple had found a decent house in the city. Michael helped them with the purchase, and Emily accepted his help. The children were enrolled in a new school, and Sarah got her own big bedroom on the first floor. She quickly made friends with a neighbor her own age and bragged about her children and grandchildren to her. I'm glad everyone likes it here, John said as he watched the little ones in their yard playing in their own playground that the previous owners of the house had built. Yeah, it's a spread for them here and lots of fun things to do, and there are hardly any kids left in Springfield. The day Emily's water broke, the whole family was eagerly awaiting the arrival of their baby girl. In the hallway of the delivery room, the children sat still, not bothering anyone. They were excited that Mom would soon have a real baby instead of a belly. Emily was lucky to have a midwife. It was an older woman. I love my job. It'll be over soon. Honey, try harder, Mrs. Johnson was saying, and you could hear the strength in her voice. I can't do it anymore, Emily screamed, but Mrs. Johnson never stopped talking to her and instructing her. When little Tina came into the world, Emily cried tears of relief and happiness as she took her daughter in her arms for the first time. Congratulations, you did a good job, the midwife smiled. Did you know I've seen a mole like that before? Nancy Johnson pointed out. On Emily's wrist was a long spot in the shape of a cross. About 30 years ago, a woman in labor had one just like it, and in the same spot. Is there such a coincidence? Do such coincidences happen? Emily asked, confused. Her thoughts were now completely occupied with her daughter. That woman died. Her baby girl was put up for adoption. You should check your parentage, Nancy Johnson advised. She patted Emily on the head and went about her business. Emily told her husband everything over the phone, since no one else was allowed in the room with the young moms. You think you're adopted? John wondered, looking at his tiny daughter, who was uncomfortable peering through the glass. Maybe we should tell Michael and ask for his consent for a DNA test. That would be the fair thing to do. If it's confirmed, he might stop talking to us. Her husband hesitated. He suggested that we do the test and keep the results just for ourselves. Nothing will change, but I will understand why Dad left everything to him. It turns out I'm not my own daughter, Emily thought. It's still weird to raise a child as your own and then leave him nothing. Michael took his sister's request calmly. Emily gave him a saddened look during the discharge when they all posed for pictures. I never thought you were adopted. It might not be true. Either way, it doesn't matter. Let me hold this little princess. Michael held out his hands to Tina. What's the right way to hold them there? The DNA results came back 2 weeks later. Nancy Johnson's assumption was confirmed. Michael and Emily were not blood relatives. Shouldn't we ask David Brown to find out about my parents? Emily asked her husband. Well, if you need to, let's ask. He seems like a good man, reliable. I don't think he'd refuse help or ask for anything in return. Through David's efforts, it was learned that Olivia, Emily's birth mother, had gotten pregnant with her at an early age, but was not afraid of it. Emily's father, Peter, wanted to build a strong family. He got caught in a storm while out boating. He was swept out to sea. Blown off course, Emily told John in a trembling voice. He didn't abandon Mom, didn't betray her. She was heartbroken, but she wasn't going to put me in an orphanage. She decided to raise me on her own. Except that complications in childbirth took her life. Emily was glad she had learned the truth. She realized that her birth parents certainly wouldn't have neglected her if they were still alive. John and Emily rented the bistro space when Tina was a year old. The couple shared responsibilities in raising their children equally, so they took their time growing the business. "If you need any help, feel free to contact me," Michael assured them. "I have a lot of people I know in the food service industry who can share their experience. We can get together over lunch with some of them sometime." "Thanks, Emily," with Tina in her arms, pecked her brother on the cheek. "Are you going to your uncle's?" Emily held out her youngest daughter to her brother. "Give her here." "I need to practice," Michael said, embarrassed. "What does that mean? Your Anne is pregnant?" "I mean, we haven't even seen her, it just so happens." "But we," Michael said with a smile, seeing the genuine joy on his relatives' faces. That morning's call took Nick by surprise. When he saw the name of the caller, he became alarmed. "Yes, Vincent here. Is something wrong? Has Nayli gotten worse? Do you want to make a will? What, for 2 people at once? What's the rush?" "No, I'm sorry, of course, but I think it's a little early, to say the least." There was a tense pause, after which the interlocutor made it clear to Nick that the decision was final and irrevocable. "Okay, I'll be there. Yeah, in about an hour and a half. Tell Nayli not to worry. I'll be there on time," Nick replied, giving his voice the impartiality it needed, and disconnected the call. He did not want to go to McCullough, especially on such a sad occasion, and the young notary had a good reason for that. Nick worked in the notary office for the 5th year and never regretted that he had connected his life with law. By his 35, he had everything that many of his peers could not dream of: a nice house, an expensive car, and a favorite job. What else do you need? True, there was one painful topic that Nick did not like to talk about, and that topic was family. 2 years ago, Nick divorced his wife, who chose his best friend as a lover. Since the couple had no children, the divorce was almost painless. A man, he was not greedy, and at parting did not leave his former wife in poverty. Of course, deep down he was very sorry for the aimlessly lived years. On the other hand, any experience. After all, he, as you know, teaches well, but takes dearly. Putting aside sad thoughts, Nick began to get ready for work. A visit to McCullough's house would take him at least 2 hours of valuable time, and lawyer's time was worth its weight in gold. Taking with him a leather briefcase with everything he needed, Vincent headed for the car parked outside the house. The luxury foreign car looked magnificent, especially in the shy spring sunlight. Nick was about to get into the car when someone tugged gently on his coat sleeve. He turned his head to the left and saw a boy of about 7 or 8 holding a crumpled sheet of paper in front of him. "What do you want, buddy?" "Money?" "I'll just get my purse," Nick fussed, putting his hand into his pocket. "No, Uncle, I don't want any money." "You'd better give the note to the aunt you're going to see." "Only from hand to hand." In person, the boy asked insistently. Nick raised his eyebrows in surprise. So much for the morning meeting. What does this kid mean? Did he really know Nayli McCullough? Seeing the doubt in the notary's eyes, the boy added, "Don't you think I'm telling the truth? And I know Aunt Nayli, and my mother too. Met her in the park during a walk." "Mother? Who's your mother?" Nick asked with unconcealed irony. Catching the mockery in the man's voice, the boy sniffed resentfully. "My mom's my fortune teller. She sees everything. She has a gift. She can see into the future. And then what she sees, she writes it down on a piece of paper and gives it to the person to whom the prediction is addressed." Nick whistled in surprise and shook his head. Wow. What a busy start to the day. Fortune tellers, predictions. What on earth was going on? It wouldn't hurt if he just handed the note to the addressee, though. Let Nayli decide what to do with the information. Confident that his conclusions were correct, the notary took the crumpled sheet and tucked it into his coat pocket. "All right, I'll do it all. Keep in mind I'm taking the note without reading its contents, so hopefully there's nothing wrong with it. I'd hate to look foolish in the eyes of a client." The little boy's cheeks flared with embarrassment. "Oh, really? How can you do that? I would do anything for Aunt Maylie, and this note is very important and necessary." All right, I believe it. All right, bye. I'm sorry, I have to go." The boy nodded and, after seeing the car drive away with his eyes, went home with a sense of accomplishment. While Nick was thinking about the case of the boy's mysterious note, his McCullough clients were going about their lives. Unlike the previous days, today Naylie woke up quite early. When illness overtakes, not everyone can sleep well. The woman sighed sadly and went to the window. It was freezing at night. The quiet and cozy yard of their house was covered with fallen leaves. The end of autumn and the breath of approaching winter was felt by everyone in the city. The mood was depressed. The treatments were still not working. Her husband Vincent convinced her otherwise. "Honey, you have to be patient. Here is a new drug began to use, and the doctors do not give up hope. Sam says the treatment is making progress." There was a look of doubt on Naylie's face. Progress? How could he be making progress? A private doctor would say a lot of things to support a patient and keep the truth from him. But she felt it was different. But who but she should know the peculiarities of her own body? What's there to say? Naylie had shown signs of a formidable ailment about 2 months ago. At first it was just a malaise, nausea in the morning. Dizziness interfered with work and generally suggested pregnancy. But when Naylie bought the tests, everything immediately fell into place. There was no pregnancy at all. However, the woman herself was not surprised, because the McCulloughs were not destined to have children. Vincent, as usual, did not believe in his wife's premonitions, considering her an alarmist and easily suggestible person. "It's easy for you to reason, isn't it? It's not you who's going through a pregnancy breakdown, it's me. It's just awful. It's like a piece of you is being torn away and never coming back," Naylie objected. Vincent shook his head. In his mind, any problem could be solved with money. Big or small, of course, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was desire. No children. Is that a reason to be sad? You can try IVF treatment, and if it doesn't work out, it's no big deal. Unfortunately, no matter what the couple did, the desired pregnancy never came. Deep down, Naylie realized that if it hadn't been for that fatal accident on the road, things might have been very different. If Vincent hadn't been speeding, he would have seen the lone pedestrian and slowed down in time. But that's not what happened. No, nothing irreparable happened, at least for the pedestrian. Vincent swerved the steering wheel and avoided the collision by flying out onto the sidewalk. Fortunately, there were few people around at the time and no casualties. There were casualties, though, and Naylie was the first to feel it, her lower abdomen cramping violently. Second month of pregnancy. And here's the bottom line. Emergency hospitalization, tears, hysterics. Vincent, of course, tried to justify himself by saying it was just an accident. But according to Naylie, when you can't get pregnant for a long time and finally get what you want, there can't be any accidents. This happened 2 years ago. Seems like yesterday. Of course, Naylie forgave her husband. But how could she not, when she loved him with all her heart? As she listened to Vincent's excuses this morning, she sensed that he was obviously not telling her something. But why am I being treated at home? Why don't they give me a room at Sam's clinic? What kind of treatment is it when the doctor sees the patient once a week? What about daily rounds, checkups? Vincent's face finally changed. Naylie, what's wrong with you? You don't need this hospital regimen. It's last century, for God's sake. At home, the walls heal, you know. And the fact that the doctor comes once a week is a good thing. Sam's got it under control, and he keeps a personal record of your medical history, Vincent said. Naylie looked carefully into his eyes and saw nothing in them, no fear, no sympathy, nothing at all. He looked at her as if she were a marble statue, not a living person. and Nayli sensed that her husband was obviously hiding something. But what? What was he talking about in the study with Sam for so long? Was it really that bad? Why not just face the truth? Face the facts and come clean. In Nayli's mind, that would be a lot more honest than giving her delusions. Sighing sadly, she went to the kitchen, but Vincent intercepted her at the door. "Where do you think you're going? What if you get sick on the stairs or in the kitchen?" No, I'll cook it myself and bring it to you." Nayli looked sadly at her husband. "Thank you so much. I really appreciate your concern, but I want to make my own tea and breakfast. I want to feel like a woman again, not a bedridden sick woman." Vincent nodded understandingly and put his arm around her shoulders, of course. "Nayli, you're right. I'm sorry I wasn't thinking. Let me help you downstairs." A happy smile played on Nayli's lips. What a caring husband she had. He would sacrifice everything for her. When she entered the kitchen, she glanced around and closed her eyes blissfully. As usual, it smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, which she loved. In fact, cooking was everything to Nayli. As a wealthy woman, she could dine in restaurants and cafes every day, but she still liked to make her own dishes, the kind that would make her drool and make her dizzy. Pancakes, buns, fritters. Nayli knew it all, as well as anyone. She mixed the batter herself and stood at the stove. Even now, from time to time, she found the strength to make something tasty for her husband. Naturally, Vincent was against it. "Nayli, but you have to take care of yourself. The kitchen can wait. Trust me, it won't be a big deal if I buy food at the store or order delivery from a restaurant. That's when you'll delight me with your culinary masterpieces." Nayli nodded in agreement and almost lost her balance when she felt a bout of dizziness. "That's what I'm talking about. Sit down, get some rest." Sam called, said he'd be late today. "And I called the notary," Vincent said, and began fussing over his wife. A notary? Why, Nayli wondered. Vincent hesitated for a moment. Then came at the question from a distance, why? So that if anything happens, the firm won't be left without management. After all, it feeds us and keeps us out of medical expenses. You know that good drugs cost a lot of money nowadays. Nayli looked at her husband anxiously. "What do you mean by in case of emergency? What's that supposed to mean? Have you buried me already?" He lowered his eyes bashfully, realizing he had said too much. "No, Nayli, I haven't, of course not. I don't even think about it. It's just that things happen in life. You know that as well as I do. Treatment can take a long time, and we can't take away the company's management. You're technically the owner of the company. And you're the one who makes all the decisions. So I'm trying to think 2 steps ahead." There was resentment in Vincent's voice. Nayli sensed it immediately. Why was she getting so worked up about this notary? In fact, her husband was right. Sickness was sickness. But business had to move forward, not stand still. "I'm sorry, Vincent, you're right. Let him come, but only in the morning, okay? I've been feeling a little dizzy since the meds. I think handing over the reins of the firm at a time like this would be the right thing to do," Nayli said, letting her husband know that she was willing to make concessions. "Well, that's great. Glad you heard me, honey. I was starting to feel a little awkward. And I've sketched out a few things in my will just in case. Nayli, don't think anything bad. So that you don't feel so sad, let's do it together. After all, we're wealthy people. We can't just let things go." Vincent said it in a voice so casual, so devoid of intonation, that Nayli felt uneasy. Was it possible to speak so calmly and coldly about such unpleasant things? When Vincent caught the change in her mood, he changed the subject with the virtuosity of a talented magician. In spite of all his tricks, Nayli still felt a lingering residue. She looked out the window, watching the leaves swirling in the wind, creating whimsical images of yellow and red. Involuntarily, Nayli remembered how she had ventured out for a walk in the park a month ago. She had met a woman fortune teller. She was in her early 30s, maybe a little older. At first glance, not everyone could recognize her as a fortune teller. Ordinary modest clothes, no gypsy outfits or voluminous dresses. A dress and a small flower, a purse on her shoulder, and a notebook in which the fortune teller wrote down what she saw in the future clients. This was the first time Nayli had encountered such a method of divination. Usually all sorts of healers and mediums like to put on fog and other mystical tinsel, but here everything happened quite differently. The fortune teller approached only those whom she herself had chosen from the general mass and, touching her hands, said what she saw. At the same time, she behaved calmly, confidently, as a true professional of her work should. Nayli could not be more precise about her age because of the shawl that covered the woman's head. She approached Nayli on her own, as if she sensed the call for help coming from her. Though at that moment Nayli felt much better than she did now. "I see something is troubling you," the stranger said first. Nayli timidly looked up and noticed a boy of about 7 or 8 years old hovering near the fortune teller. A son, I suppose she thought at once. But she answered the question nevertheless. "Yes, you are right. I am worried. I am seriously ill, it seems, and the treatment does not help. Although maybe it all seems to me only to me." The companion gently touched Nayli's hand and then said, changing the conversation to you, "I see you're dreaming of children. And that's your main problem. But with that man, with whom you have tied your life, you will never have children." Such an unpleasant truth made Nayli uncomfortable. "Yes, you're right. It really is like that. But how do you know?" The fortune teller hesitated for a moment, then said simply, "I see. It is my cross to bear for the rest of my life." Nayli reached for her purse, but the fortune teller gently withdrew her hand. "No need, I'll make do. I don't take money from people. That's not good. Just groceries. And there's no need to thank me." Nayli was confused and froze with her purse in her hands. "You need to think about your health and take a closer look at your surroundings," the fortune teller added. At first, Nayli thought that the fortune teller worked according to a well-established scheme, selecting from the crowd of passers by those from whom she could extract more profit. Take her, for example. You can see that Nayli is young and in the park walks by herself without a child. So there's a good chance there's a problem with that. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out the root of the problem. Nayli would never have believed the fortune teller if she charged her for her services, but she refused. She also hinted at problems with her inner circle. What does she mean by that? On that warm September day, Nayli thanked the fortune teller, but she did it through her son. Calling the toddler over to her, she pointed him to the bakery stall and asked with a smile, "How do you feel about having lunch?" The boy looked furtively at his mom and then said, "Yeah, I don't mind, actually. Just don't go to waste on me. 1 bun and juice will be enough, if you can have it orange flavored." Nayli smiled. As of late, socializing with small children had brought her peace of mind and satisfaction. "Well, let's go, if Mommy doesn't mind," Nayli said, and headed towards the nearest kiosk. "Mom doesn't mind," the fortune teller replied after her, bringing a smile to Nayli's face. Of course, she bought a lot more than the boy had asked for. As it turned out a little later, his name was Andrew, and his mom was Martha. The fortune teller did not join the meal, leaving her son together with Nayli on the bench. She herself stood a little farther away, giving advice to another client. "Your mom is serious, and she seems to have a special gift. I've never seen anything like it," Nayli said casually. Andrew nodded and chewed a piece of bun and drank a good sip of juice. "Yeah, my mom's great. Everything she says comes true. It's a pity she can't tell herself anything," she says. "Sees only for strangers." Nayli looked at the boy with a smile. So small, and yet he talks like an adult. They chatted for about half an hour and then parted as friends. Nayli waved goodbye to Martha, hoping that they would meet again sometime. But they never did. For over the past month, Nayli's health had deteriorated considerably, and she could not find the strength for another walk, though from time to time she thought of her meeting with little Andrew, and the thought of him always brought a sweet smile to her lips. Once Nayli had even tried to tell her husband about it, but he had not been understanding. "Why are you listening to some quacks? You are being treated by a qualified doctor, not a village witch doctor. And all these prophecies are pure fiction and lies. You see how many of them there are lately? They're used to living at other people's expense, and they don't want to work. It's easier to fool people and get paid for it," Vincent reacted sharply. "Honey, I was just saying that. I didn't mean it. It wasn't anything serious. I just liked Andrew and his mom," Nayli retorted, her lips pressed together resentfully. During that conversation, sensing the change in her voice, Vincent had decided not to pursue such an unpleasant topic and had turned his attention to something else. What Nayli didn't know was that afterward she had been too lazy to find Martha in person to give her an opinion on her prophecies. "Listen, you half-baked witch, don't interfere with my family's life. My wife and I will figure out what to do and when to do it. And you and your predictions, go fool someone else." During his angry tirade, on Martha's face did not shake a single muscle. She was letting Vincent know that she wasn't afraid of him, and that she was ready to go all the way. "I only tell people what I see, and all my predictions have come true. That means I've helped others and kept them from making irreparable mistakes." Vincent relented. He gave her a hateful look and turned his back and walked away. Martha stared after him for a long time, feeling a growing uneasiness. This was usually the case when a person was in real danger, and Nayli had to be rescued. As they approached the McCullough house, Nick honked his horn, and after a couple of seconds, the automation kicked in. The gate slowly opened, and Vincent was already waiting for him in the yard, patting the notary's shoulder confidingly. "Good to see you again," Nick the host said. "Here's the thing. I'd like to mention it in person while Nayli can't hear. The fact is, she's seriously, very seriously ill, "Is it really that bad?" Nick asked anxiously. "Are the doctors doing everything they can?" "Yes, only the result so far is extremely disappointing. That's why I'm forced to make this difficult decision. There's no telling what might happen. After all, if Nayli dies, the family business will just be bled dry, I mean, it's just a matter of this and that. And the competition's still out there. They're just about to take our piece of the pie." The notary looked at the owner of the house with distrust. To tell the truth, Vincent McCullough was not a pleasant person to talk to. The businessman's behavior was alarming and illogical. His wife was dying, and all he cared about was business, even though all the assets belonged to Nayli. After all, it was she who managed to accumulate the initial capital by working on the stock exchange. Having led it to develop his own business, according to Nick, Vincent came to everything ready to go. When Nathalie McCullough was firmly on her feet and could compete with many of the successful businessmen of the city and region, the notary was brought out of his state of anxious reflection by the ingratiating voice of the landlord. "Well, I think the formalities are over. Then we can go into the house. Nayli's probably waiting for us by now." Nick nodded and pulled his hand out of his coat pocket and headed inside. At that moment, he didn't even notice the note the fortune teller's son had given him fall out of his left pocket. Vincent did not yawn, however, and picked it up from the leaf-strewn pavement. He waited for the guest to enter the house, then quickly unfolded the note and ran his eyes over it. The note contained only a single phrase, "Take care of your wife." Vincent's face contorted into a grimace of displeasure. "Is that what this is about? I don't need to take care of my wife anymore." "Well, we'll see, he muttered to himself. Folding the note, Vincent walked over to the trash can and immediately discarded it. That's a lot better than the kind of people who throw notes around and cause confusion between spouses. Seeing a pale as chalk Nayli, Nick involuntarily flinched. "What, do I look that bad?" she asked ironically. "No, Nayli, it's fine. It's just that you've lost so much weight noticeably." Nayli sighed sadly. "Well, you see, that means there's more to come. Other people are on diets 24 hours a day, but I'm losing weight." Having exchanged a couple of joking remarks, Nayli suggested the notary to get down to business. At that moment, Nick remembered the note the boy had handed him. "Wait a minute, Nayli. I have this thing that was passed to you by a kid. Funny one, he also has a mom who's a fortune teller. I think they kind of work at the park." Nayli smiled understandingly. "Ah, that must have been Andrew. He's a good boy. Where's that note?" Nick carefully checked one pocket, another, but the note was nowhere to be found. "I'm sorry, Nayli, I'm terribly embarrassed. But apparently I lost that piece of paper somewhere. Maybe in the car or in the yard." While I was walking to the house, Nick said thoughtfully, blushing to the roots of his hair. At that moment, Vincent McCullough entered the living room. Casting his guest a mocking glance, he said, "Weren't you the one who lost the note in the yard? It fell just above the rainwater drain grate." Nick instantly perked up and a light of hope flashed in his eyes. "And what about it? I hope she survived." Vincent grinned wickedly. "Survived? I'll bet she did. She fell right into the sewer drain. So Nick, no offense, but I'm not much of a diver." The notary exhaled disappointedly. Vincent guessed from his guest's reaction that he knew nothing of the note's contents. "I wonder who handed him that piece of paper. What difference does it make? The important thing is that the evidence is destroyed. All the rest is trivial," Vincent thought as he sat down beside his wife. Saddened by the loss, Nick filled out the necessary paperwork in silence. He felt that he had failed not only the boy, but Nayli herself. It was possible that the note might have contained something important, but it didn't seem to make any sense now. Throughout the whole procedure, Nayli felt unwell. The persistent dizziness and nausea prevented her from concentrating on all the nuances of the notary's case. Finally, when everything was finished, she signed the necessary papers and exhaled in relief. "There, we've done it. A will at 32. Would anyone believe such a thing?" Nick lowered his gaze in embarrassment. As a man of intelligence and foresight, he'd realized before he'd visited the house that Vincent had been the one who'd initiated the will. Now, in the event of Nayli's death, he would receive not only her entire business, but also all the financial assets lying in some of the world's banks. But Nick didn't care much about these subtleties. The point was quite different. The notary was concerned that Nayli was so irresponsible about her health. If she didn't think about herself, who would want her? The answer to that question could only be given by Nayli herself. But judging by her passive mood, she was in no hurry to do so. Nick left McCullough's house and looked around the yard once more. Vincent hadn't been lying. The note was nowhere to be seen. With a resigned wave of his hand, he got into the car and started the engine. Unfortunately, the pang of guilt was still there, gnawing at his soul like a wild, hungry beast. "I promised the boy I'd give him that note, didn't I? And the boy wouldn't have come to my house at the crack of dawn if there hadn't been something important in that message," the notary pondered. Nick turned to the highway. His mood was completely ruined. He was going to visit his sick father. A nurse was a nurse, but Hector had no one closer than his son. Nick had always been proud of his dad. The bus driver had spent half his life behind the wheel and knew almost everything about engines. Nick remembered well the times when he and his father traveled around the city, sitting next to the window in the cabin of the bus. And he also liked to go with his dad and his colleagues to picnics and rather nice sit-downs by the fire with baked potatoes, fried sausages, and pickles. All this idyll was cut short in an instant when Hector's bus was involved in a terrible accident, colliding with a truck that had lost control. In fact, the driver of the truck was not at fault, because the front wheel burst on the move completely deprived him of maneuverability. From the strong impact, the interior of the bus caught fire, and there was panic among the passengers. Nick did not know all this then, and read about the incident only in the newspapers. The impact was so strong that the bus driver was trapped in the cabin, and in case of fire it reduced his chances of survival to 0. Passengers jumped out of the flaming bus, and quite expectedly thought only of themselves. Nick's father was already mentally saying goodbye to his life when a miracle happened. He was helped out of the burning bus. And the most amazing thing was that the rescuer of Hector was a girl. Unfortunately, at that moment he had already lost consciousness and did not have time to ask the name of the young heroine. Nick's father was lucky he survived. True, to call full-fledged this life was no longer possible. In the accident, Hector injured his spine, from which he was confined to a wheelchair for many years. Of course, Nick did everything possible for his father, but his health was deteriorating by the day. But the young notary did not lower his hands. He provided his father with proper care, hiring a nurse and paying for the services of a private doctor's house call. The longer Nick thought about Nayli's will, the more he realized that something was wrong with the case. Even very wealthy people try to be treated in special institutions, but not at home as Nayli did. And where does her husband look? Doesn't he see anything? Or maybe he's just pretending? Tired of puzzling over what was in the note, Nick decided to find a fortune teller and personally ask her what happened. To do so, he called the receptionist and canceled the appointment. He found Martha almost immediately. This was partly thanks to Andrew. Nick saw him right away. "Oh, Uncle Lawyer is back," exclaimed the boy and began to jump on the spot. "Not a lawyer, but a notary, son. Believe me, they are two completely different fields," Martha corrected her son. "Hello. Did you deliver the note to Nayli McCullough?" Nick got straight to the point. "Yes, that's right. I hope you delivered it to the address," she asked. Nick lowered his eyes in embarrassment. "Unfortunately, I couldn't do that. Let me ask you, what was in that note?" Martha suddenly turned pale. Slight wrinkles appeared in the corners of her eyes. She still wore a headscarf on her head, making her look like a villager. "Nayli is in danger. I wrote to her to be careful with her husband," Martha replied in a shaky voice. Nick shook his head uncomprehendingly. "But how did you know about it? And why did your son come to me with the note in the first place?" Martha's face seemed carved out of plaster. No one could understand what she was feeling at that moment. Finally, the fortune teller answered. "I had a dream tonight. It was more like a vision. It involved you, Nayli, and her husband. That's why I asked for your help." Nick looked at her doubtfully. Does she really think that he will believe in all this mystical nonsense? No, but it's ridiculous. Dreams, omens, it's pure fraud, that's what it is. However, Nick didn't say it out loud and only asked one question. "You forgive me, of course, but in general, what is the error rate of your predictions?" "My mom always tells the truth. She had a real gift after she was almost killed on a bus. Well, just like that superhero from the cartoon," intervened in the conversation Andrew. Andrew interjected. Nick turned pale and asked, addressing Martha rather than her young son. "On the bus? A fire on a bus 8 years ago? I didn't mishear that, did I? My father worked on that route. Hector, maybe you know." The fortune teller's lips treacherously quivered and tears welled up in her eyes. "Yes, I know your father. Not personally, of course. I'm the one who pulled him off the bus. I saved him. I suffered severe burns to my head. The wounds healed over time, but the scars remain. That's why I wear a scarf to cover the burns." Now it was Nick's turn to be surprised. God, is it possible? I had thanked my father's savior so many times in my mind, and I had no idea that one day I would be able to thank her. Martha lowered her eyes in embarrassment. "That's what anyone in my position should have done. In a way, I'm even grateful to your father and what happened." The notary looked at her in surprise, a mute question in his eyes. Martha nodded and continued. "I had gone to terminate the pregnancy that day. I was a naive fool. I believed the restaurant manager's son, and I fell in love. As the epiphany came, it was like a bucket of ice water poured on my head. 4 to 5 weeks pregnant, my fiancé didn't talk much. He just handed me the money and sent me to the hospital. I was crying the whole way, stupid me. I couldn't make up my mind, but when that accident happened, I immediately realized what I had to do. I made a vow to myself, if I survive, I'll keep the baby and become the best mom in the world. And if I didn't, then how could I be of any use?" Martha's confession shocked Nick to the core. Looking at Andrew, who was standing nearby, Nick smiled and winked at him. The boy took the baton and responded with a thumbs-up gesture of approval. Martha gave her son an affectionate look and turned her attention back to Nick. "After the incident with the bus, I started having visions. At first I thought it was the result of the trauma, but the truth was a little different. My grandmother told me that there were fortune tellers and clairvoyants in our family, but the chain of gifted people was broken. But I have a gift again. Unfortunately, I can only see the coming danger that threatens a particular person, and nothing more." Nick looked at Martha with respect. After all, if it weren't for her, his father would have died on that bus, which had become a fire trap for him. "So you think Nayli is in danger?" Nick broke the silence. "I don't even doubt it, and I'm 200% sure of it." The notary hesitated. The fortune teller's words definitely made sense, but Nayli looked calm. She'd signed the papers herself. It was hardly forced, but it wouldn't hurt to take a closer look at the McCullough house. Returning to this, Nick began to mentally go over those who could help him in this difficult task. But no matter how much he thought, he could not find a suitable candidate. At the same time, Vincent McCullough, with a sense of accomplishment, took Nayli to her room and helped her to bed so that she could get some rest before the doctor arrived. When he was satisfied that his wife was asleep, he quietly closed the door and hurried to the hall, where he intended to make one very important call. Deciding that Nayli was already dreaming for the 10th time, Vincent turned on the video call, as he had done so many times before. He waited for quite a while. When he was desperate, a sleepy girl's voice came through. "Yes, darling, hello. Did you want something?" Vincent bit his lip in impatience. "Of course I wanted something. Mavis, it worked. You hear that? She made a will in my favor." "Who did? Your wife?" Vincent cringed. "Well, yes, she did. Who else? Now all we have to do is bide our time and we'll be in business." There was a touch of resentment in Mavis's voice. "There we go, waiting again. Our babies won't wait. I already went to the ultrasound. I didn't wait for you. You're always busy. Imagine we'll have twins. What's not to help a rich dad like you?" Vincent sighed convulsively. What a stroke of luck. How could he have hoped to be the father of 2 beautiful babies at once? Nayli was a rotten vessel, with her pockets full of money and no way to get pregnant. Just be patient. Things will change soon. There'll be a holiday on our street too. You mark my word. Yes, what else? Your brother's coming. Remember today? I'll expect him at 3. Make it look real. He should take his robe too, because he always has stains on it. He's a doctor at a private clinic, Vincent said in a businesslike tone. Okay, I'll tell him. All right, I'll see you later, Mavis whispered languidly, and disconnected the call. There you go, as usual. I didn't have time to say a word to her brother, Vincent exclaimed resentfully. In the back of his mind, he saw himself as the head of the McCullough financial empire. How could he not, with Nayli's time running out? The medicines he and his fake Dr. Sam had given Nayli were just harmless vitamins and nothing more. It was a very different kind of illness. The plan of Vincent and his mistress was for Nayli to pass away on her own, without any poisoning or other crime. The thing was, he was scared to death of going to prison, where the unwritten laws reigned. Mavis's brother Sam just laughed. "Come on, there's nothing to be afraid of. I've done 2 terms, and I'm alive and well. But you're wrong to refuse the poison. I'm working at the morgue now as a corpsman. I can arrange for the body not to be cut open. I've got the connections." But Vincent didn't want to hear anything about crime. Instead, he had devised a very clever scheme whereby Nayli was to escape from complications of a disease that no one was actually going to treat. Thus, Brother Meves would come to their house from time to time, and after examining Nayli, would give her a new batch of what were simply vitamins. Sam played his part skillfully, having heard all sorts of medical words and terms in the morgue. He used them like a sleeve. The only problem was the tattoos on the bones of his hands. Vincent had wanted to use makeup at first, but Mavis had suggested that he take the easier route and simply wear medical gloves. The theatrics worked well during the examination of the patient. For weeks now, Nayli had been taking vitamins instead of expensive broad-spectrum drugs. Today, too, Vincent couldn't help but worry as he waited for Sam to arrive. His worries were unnecessary, though, because everything had gone smoothly with the notary. Of course, it wasn't easy to persuade Nayli to remain calm and continue to believe in the power of the pills. "It's nothing. She's been so dumb lately that she won't be able to put 2 plus 2 together," Vincent thought with a wry smirk on his lips. If only he'd known that right now Nayli was watching him, standing at the railing of the 2nd-story staircase, staggering from side to side from exhaustion when she hadn't swallowed the sleeping pills. After witnessing Vincent's creepy confession during the video call, Nayli couldn't believe herself. Could it all be a hallucination? But that's what happens when people have delusions. She was experiencing something like that right now. She was seeing things that couldn't be real. But no matter how much Nayli rubbed her eyes or pinched her shoulder, it was still the same. God, what to do now? Where to run to? Who to ask for help? A phone. I need a phone. But I'd given it to Vincent so that the calls and notifications wouldn't interfere with my sleep. God, I'm such an idiot. Nayli's mind raced. But it was too late to tear her hair out. While Nayli agonizingly searched for a way out of the situation, Nick decided to go back and have a thorough talk with her husband. The young notary had not thought through the strategy of the conversation and, as it often happens, hoped against hope. Many people knew that if necessary, Nick could dumb down anyone, because at the beginning of his career he worked as a criminal defense lawyer in the city court and masterfully knew how to confuse the situation. But as he pulled up to McCullough's house a second time, his attention was caught by a thin young man in his mid-30s, short-cropped hair, a wary, scratchy gaze that smelled cold. Wait, where could I have seen him before, wondered the notary. The stranger approached the massive gate of the McCullough house and pressed the bell button several times. Nick took a closer look and almost lost his senses at what he saw. Oh, it's Sam Zotov. That's right. I defended him in court a few years ago. Robbery is part of an armed group. How long ago? That was 5 to 7 years ago. He hasn't changed much. Still the same angry look and hedgehog haircut. Nick's suspicions only grew stronger after what he'd seen. What kind of business could Vincent and Sam be in? Especially since one of them was a longtime pilot and the other a possible heir to his wife's vast financial empire. When she heard the doorbell ring, Nayli flinched. Surely it must be the doctor in disguise showing up again. What's his name? Sam. Honey, get up. The doctor's here for a checkup, Vincent announced in a well-practiced voice. Nayli went quietly back to her room to feign sleepiness after the unplanned awakening. I'll be right back. I'll just tug on my robe. Okay, and her spouse was already meeting her accomplice in the living room. Winking at each other, the conspirators exchanged a firm handshake and walked leisurely to Naley's room. "How's Mavis?" "Oh, it's great. Such a person. Last time she called, she was so excited." The disguised doctor looked at him sideways and hissed quietly. "What do I know? Do you think she's reporting this to me?" Vincent nodded in agreement and was about to open the door to his wife's room when he heard the ringing of a bell from downstairs. Sam looked at Vincent with obvious disapproval. "What are you doing? Waiting. Couldn't you have invited me some other day?" "I didn't invite anyone. What's the matter with you?" "I don't even know who it is." Vincent was indignant and went to open the door. He was surprised to see the notary smiling embarrassedly at the door. "Here, Nick, what have you forgotten? Or did something happen?" Nick shifted his gaze to the guest in the medical coat and realized that he recognized him too. A second later, a knife glinted in Sam's hands. Of course, he recognized the former lawyer who had never been able to save him from a criminal conviction over 8 years ago. "Where is he, Vincent? Did he expose us?" screamed the disguised recidivist and lunged at Nick with the knife. Vincent hesitated for a moment, giving his guest precious time to make a decision. But Nick didn't make it out of the house in time. As he fell under the hail of blows, he realized that he had been foolish to go into that dangerous place alone. The forces were clearly not on the side of the notary, who was not a strong man, being thin and wiry. Perhaps, if this Dr. Bandit had not had a knife, Nick would have been able to get out of the situation unharmed. But when he felt a sharp pain in his lower abdomen, he realized that time was running out in minutes, maybe even seconds. His eyes immediately darkened, and his mouth felt a nasty bitterness that made him acutely thirsty. Falling to the floor, Nick didn't know that at that very moment Naley had already gotten to the phone and was calling the nearest police station. Nor did he hear the sirens of the patrol cars that had surrounded the house in minutes, blocking all entrances and exits. The last thing that stuck in Nick's memory was the crying eyes of Naley, who had witnessed the drama that had unfolded during the arrest by the police. Vincent had tried to pass himself off as a victim, blaming Sam's accomplice, but it didn't work out so well. Handcuffed, they went to the police station, where they had a long, detailed conversation with the local operatives. The badly wounded Nick was taken away by ambulance, but Naley refused to be hospitalized because the next day she was going to undergo a full examination in one of the clinics. The most affected by this situation was a young notary, who happened to be in the center of events. Despite the fact that Nick's operation was carried out in time, he was still in a critical condition. All to blame was the traumatic shock he experienced during the wounding. During the interrogation, Vincent denied everything. He tried to accuse Sam of all the deadly sins, but for such a stubborn suspect, the investigator had his own tricks. One of them was a certain amount of credible information obtained during an interview with a repeat offender. Posing as a doctor. That's where Vincent got a big surprise. Mavis and Sam weren't actually related. They were secretly involved in a love affair in which they were expecting a future twin. The conspirators' calculation was simple. By deceiving Vincent, the couple intended to rob the wealthy heir to the ground after he had gotten rid of his rapidly declining wife. It was a huge blow to Vincent, whose line of defense was deeply breached. Only now did he realize that all this time Mavis had been deceiving him, using him for her own ends. It happened to be the tragic outcome Martha had envisioned when she had tried to warn Naley of the danger. She didn't consider the wealthy businesswoman a friend or close acquaintance. She'd probably do it for anyone who needed help one way or another. "And Nick's children died?" Andrew asked sadly. "Yeah, I saw the story on the news," he added quietly. Martha gathered her son's unruly hair and quietly replied, "No, he's alive, son, only in a coma. And when he'll come out, no one knows. I think we should go and see him." "Yes, of course, we'll go by all means. When?" "Today, tomorrow," Andrew said animatedly. Martha shook her head. No, buddy. In a couple of days, it will be fine. Nayli, remembering the bravery shown by Nick, took care of all the expenses related to the operation and subsequent rehabilitation. But the most important news awaited the businesswoman a little later, when she learned the results of her tests. My God, I don't have oncology. There was a mistake during the last examination. Yes, it's a miracle, Nayli tearfully exclaimed. Of course, it was still too early to be truly happy, because she had a long course of treatment ahead of her under the care of experienced real doctors of the highest qualification. At the same time, she never forgot what Nick had done for her. When she entered his room, she could not hold back her tears. Next to the motionless body of her son, sitting in a wheelchair, was Nick's father, Hector. The disabled man's hands were trembling with excitement. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. The former bus driver arrived at the hospital despite the prohibition of the nurse and the attending physician, which shocked the medical staff to the core. At that moment, the door of the ward creaked softly, and Martha and Andrew appeared on the threshold. They had all gathered to pay their respects to the man who had risked his life to save others. I think we need to speak to him aloud, someone in the audience pronounced. There is an opinion that it is the best remedy in such cases, Nayli suggested quietly. In the short time she had been undergoing the treatment, her cheeks had turned pink again, and a mischievous glint had appeared in her eyes. Agreed, Martha nodded, confident that Nick was hearing every word perfectly. So I can sing a song, Andrew asked with a smile. Of course you can, just quietly. Otherwise you might wake up the whole ward. Nayli smiled and winked at the baby, remembering the day they had first met. The weeks flew by. Finally, Nick came out of his coma, and his first phrase was, "Where's my dad?" All this time, Martha, Nayli, and Hector were on alternating duty in the room, patiently waiting for him to return to the world of the living. As it happened, the moment of awakening fell precisely on Martha's shift, who greeted him with a smile on her face. She was also without her customary shawl, which skillfully concealed her burn scar. "And it suits you very well. Why don't you not wear it anymore?" "Okay," Nick whispered with a smile and closed his eyes tiredly. Martha touched his hand gently, sending a pleasant wave of shivers through his entire body. She'd been in Nick's room almost every day since then. She also took Hector with her, so that the lonely father wouldn't have to go through the separation so hard. The most happy about it was Andrew, who chatted with the former driver all day long about everything in the world, funny stories from his life, and retold someone else's road stories. By the time they were discharged from the hospital, Nick and Martha already considered themselves a couple and openly emphasized their status. How could it be otherwise when there was a love in their hearts that only grew stronger with each passing day? Looking at the lovers with a smile, Nayli sincerely rejoiced at their happiness. However, the businesswoman's joy was not groundless at all, because during her treatment at the clinic, she managed to get acquainted with a very nice therapist, raising a young daughter alone. After being discharged from the hospital, Nick returned to his old job, which he now liked even more. It is also rumored that the notary has become more careful in business and now checks the information received several times, especially when the issue concerns inheritance. Later, Martha and Nayli became family friends, never ceasing to amaze others with their successes. Nayli's wedding gift to Martha was plastic surgery, which almost perfectly removed all the unpleasant memories of the fire on the bus. How Helen hated sad funeral ceremonies. Well, of course, no one asked her permission to live or go beyond the border, to a place from which no one could return. And now, as soon as she saw the inscription "Julia, neighbor" on the smartphone screen, her heart sank with an unpleasant feeling. "Helen, hello baby. It's on Julia who worries. Sorry to bring you bad news this morning, but your father's phone isn't answering. So I have to bring grief down on you. George died. I was going to work and saw him sitting in an apple tree. Look, he seems to be doing something. half turning towards the street. Well, I waved to him and say, "Good morning." I asked what he was doing early in the morning, and George showed zero emotion to me, didn't even move. Although you know that my voice is loud, it's impossible not to hear. I went up to George, but he wasn't breathing. While I'm sitting here on the porch, I called all the necessary services, except for the ritual. It's not for me to decide how to see off George, but to be honest, I need to go to work. "Would you come?" Estedly responded in a hoarse voice. "Of course, Aunt Julia. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The sad news that her paternal grandfather, the always cheerful and cheerful George, had overcome the last milestone came as a real shock to Helen. We have to go, of course, organize everything, call everyone from grandfather's phone book. However, I wanted to convince myself that this conversation with my neighbor about my grandfather was just a bad dream. Now all you need to do is open your eyelids wide and look at the call history on your smartphone and make sure that there was no call. Unfortunately, this hope was not justified, and there really was a call from Aunt Valia. And the girl did everything possible to quickly get to her grandfather's house, located within the city, but in the so-called private sector. Having already got into the taxi car that had arrived on call, Helen asked her boss for a day off, then had a short conversation with her office colleague, explaining where the documents were, which, as luck would have it, the customers were supposed to come for today. The girl never dared to make the most difficult call. How to inform your father and mother, who have flown away on vacation to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary, that they urgently need to return to say goodbye to grandfather George. Helen became sad. How unexpectedly this tragedy happened. Just the day before yesterday, she called her grandfather. He said that he was waiting for a visit and asked him to come quickly. Not for the sake of caring for a small garden, but to talk on some issue, to seek it. Helen promised to be there on the weekend that had recently flown by. She could have easily visited her grandfather, but she got a little sick, postponed the visit, called and apologized. They chatted for a bit about nothing. Grandfather George recalled the method that his wife Kristen and grandmother Helen always used. The girl listened that she needed to brew special herbs, wait until the infusion cooled to a pleasant warmth, stir a spoonful of honey in a glass of healing liquid, drink it, and lie down under the blanket. She promised that she would undergo intensive treatment and then visit him. And in the first month of autumn, when she had a vacation scheduled, the girl promised to stay with him for at least a week. Lord, how embarrassing. Now Helen was ashamed that she was going to wait for her vacation. After all, by public transport with transfers, you could get to grandfather in 45 minutes. When there were no traffic jams on the roads, you could even after work go not home, but to a loved one who had been incredibly bored alone for a little over a year. One over it was uneasy that she was a free girl and could easily keep a lonely grandfather company. It would be quite possible to go to work and back by taxi. Of course, it would be more expensive than using public transport, but it would be quick and comfortable. Alternatively, you could simply leave the house a little earlier in order to walk to the transport stop from which the tram of the required route departs. Everything could absolutely be resolved, sorted out somehow. But he didn't have the insight to understand that Grandpa George needed care and supervision, and his requests to come were not just the whim of a bored elderly man. Helen was tormented by a painful feeling of shame, and sighing, she tried to call her parents. However, both Mom and Dad's numbers were out of network coverage. The girl had to send a letter by email, hoping that the unpleasant news would be read not too late. While solving troubles and questions, the time on the way to my grandfather's house flew by unnoticed. Helen got out of the taxi and, listening to Aunt Valia's sympathetic remarks, felt real grief falling on her. The neighbor hugged the girl who arrived, asked her to hold on, and ran to work. Helen looked at her grandfather and kept expecting that now he would get up, stretch, and invite her to a tea party in the house or in the gazebo entwined with grapes. However, no miracle happened. Services, which arrived in response to a call from a neighbor, began another whirlwind of sad affairs associated with the passing of the older generation. The lady doctor confirmed the death of my grandfather, presumably from a heart attack. She recommended funeral agencies to the girl and explained that there were specialists working there who could organize mourning procedures with the most due respect for the deceased and sympathy for his relatives. Helen listened to the advice and tried with all her might to hold back bitter tears of despair. Only by lunchtime the girl was left alone. Helen entered her grandfather's house and burst into tears when she saw the phone on the table, which he apparently forgot on his last earthly morning. Probably if he had a cell phone, he would be able to call somewhere and ask for help. But it was impossible to change the past. Everything turned out the way it did. The girl discovered the cash, which her grandfather George and grandmother Kristen told her about shortly after she came of age. The man then tilted the rug hanging over the bed, gently pressed on one of the wooden panels, then with a slight movement moved it to the side. The surprised girl saw a deep vertical niche. Grandfather explained, "Here, granddaughter, Speta and I are slowly putting money here so that it won't be a burden to anyone. You'll bury us with this money." Helen remembered how she began to grumble at her grandparents. She said that it was too early for them to think about such a topic. She assured that they would still have the opportunity to babysit their great-grandchildren. "No, my dear, that won't do. First, I will have to consider approve, and then help raise the kids. Mom and Dad always have no time." Granny, patting her smiling granddaughter on the head, quietly objected. "Helen, we're not asking you whether it's too early for us to think about our last journey in this world or not. Just showing you so you know, just in case. After all, George already has an anniversary this year, 70 years old, and I'm not much younger. Alas, at that age anything can happen. Your parents, of course, also know about this hiding place. But you never know, maybe they'll be wary or start being modest." Grandfather George supported his wife. "Now, we don't want to be a burden to you. So let's end the conversation." The grandmother hastened to change the topic and began to talk about the amusements of the selected kitten, simply nicknamed the man. Now, 6 years after this conversation, the skinny kid has turned into a well-fed, long, and independent, handsome man. The owner's departure was a real shock for the animal, and he even lost his excellent appetite for several days. However, grandfather George managed to pull the cat out of this state, and now this mission fell to Helen. It seemed to the girl that the orphan cat understood everything, and that's why he curled up on his grandfather's bed and didn't even react to the sound of the refrigerator door opening. The agencies recommended by our employee were indeed professional. A serious man suggested that Helen hold a farewell not at home, but in a special ritual hall at the cemetery. Getting there is much easier than here in the private sector, and even though the house is big, there will still be fuss, unnecessary fuss. The room there is convenient and comfortable. Everyone will be able to say goodbye calmly and without the crush that usually accompanies the removal of a body from an apartment or house. Everything will be both touching and civilized. Besides, understand, it will save you a lot of problems. The offer seemed reasonable to Helen, but she had to spend not only her meager savings but also her grandfather's stash to pay for funeral services. The girl did everything that was necessary. As if being in a state of sleep, she kept waiting for her parents to arrive, or at least answer the email, but in vain. The girl contacted the hotel where they had booked a room, but as we managed to understand from the answer in broken Russian, Mr. and Mrs. Hurd did not move in. They explained that they had decided to change plans a little. Helen was worried about her parents, but she couldn't do anything. Now clods of earth began to fall on the lid of grandfather George's coffin, but neither his son nor his daughter-in-law appeared. Words of condolences and sympathy were received by Helen, who had to listen to the lamentations of distant relatives who came to see the old man off on his last journey. Some spoke bluntly about the thoughtless son and daughter-in-law who did not appear at the mournful event. The girl defended her parents as best she could, and the guardians of other people's morality fell silent for a while, turning the conversation to other topics. Gradually, only relatives and closest neighbors remained at the funeral table, organized in a small cafe. Helen, who last saw most of them a little less than a year ago at farewell to grandmother Sveta, could hardly endure all the questions. She wanted to run away from the cafe as soon as possible, but she had to fulfill her granddaughter's duty to the very end. From time to time, she herself, along with the waiters, took out dirty dishes and brought funeral treats, just so as not to sit at the table listening to the conversations of those gathered growing louder. Quite by chance, Helen, while serving another portion of pies, overheard part of the conversation between Aunt Valia and grandfather's cousin Stepan. George sometimes communicated with this apple tree like a person. I told him, even when Kristen was alive, that this useless tree needs to be cut down. It has long grown higher than the roof of the house, and apples cannot be easily obtained. Kristen, Kingdom of Heaven. She kept swearing that this tree was of little use. It would bear fruit for a year so that you were tired of growing the harvest. Then it wouldn't bear a single fruit. Everything was threatened to be cut down. Only George, blessed to his memory, always stood up to defend the apple tree, nodding, and Julia agreed with the interlocutor. What you say is true. George's passion for this old apple tree also seemed strange to me. Well, if only the plot was about a hectare, then it would seem that the place wouldn't be a problem. But it's simply stupid to leave such a huge tree in such a small snippet of conversation, made Helen think. Indeed, in fact, grandfather treated this apple tree as if it were a living person. The girl often saw him affectionately stroking the bark of a tree as he passed by. Once as a child, Helen, deciding to play, climbed onto a branch, which broke off under her. And grandfather George, entrusting his granddaughter to the care of his wife, began to treat the wound of the tree himself, recently. After the death of grandmother Kristen, my grandfather even preferred to relax alone under the crown of an apple tree, rather than in a specially built gazebo entwined with grapes. Thoughts from the mysterious apple tree that George had so highlighted briefly receded to sad worries. The relatives were the last to leave the rented hall, and Stepan reminded Helen, no, someone should definitely spend the night in George's house until 40. You won't be scared alone until your parents show up. Maybe send someone with you. At least take Mylena, my youngest daughter, with you. She has nothing to do at home anyway. Her husband is on a business trip. You can sit and chat. Looking at her, she saw the face of a woman who clearly had her own plans for the evening and completely lacked the desire to spend the night somewhere in an unfamiliar place. Helen hastened to refuse. But thank you, but I really can handle it myself. After all, it's like a sign of my respect for my grandfather. Having said goodbye to everyone, the girl hurried to the public transport stop, since her relatives had to go in completely different directions. As soon as Helen opened the gate of her grandfather's house, she regretted that she had tried to create the image of an independent and strong person. Of course, she's not too young to be afraid of an empty house. But I've already spent several nights here completely alone, so he can handle it. She began to think again about the reason why the tree occupied such an important place in the life of her relative. Thoughtfully, the girl hand-fed the sad cat, but she felt somehow uneasy being in the house, even in the company of a cat. Helen went out into the yard and, obeying an impulse, approached a tree on which small green fruits were hanging high somewhere. A flock of goosebumps ran down her spine when the girl saw scratches on the ground. There was no doubt. Grandfather George left these marks. It became truly creepy when Helen had the crazy idea that the dying man was scratching the ground not in agony but trying to dig something up. The girl went to the barn, took a small garden trowel from there, and returning to the apple tree, began to carefully dig the ground. Almost immediately, the scoop hit something hard. Helen began to dig with the utmost care and soon pulled out from a shallow hole a solid rectangular package, wrapped in a bag and additionally wrapped with tape. Helen had never heard any stories about family heirlooms and was truly shocked. At home, Helen laid an old towel on the table, which had long been asking for a well-deserved rest somewhere in the trash, put her find on it, and carefully opened the package with a kitchen knife, which grandfather always kept sharp. Under the layers of tape in the bag was a metal candy box. The girl, holding her breath, opened it and saw inside not jewelry or money but papers under the folded notebook leaves, clearly covered with grandmother's even handwriting. There were envelopes. Judging by the fact that the package was quite modern, with the emblem of a chain supermarket, and the paper was neither damp nor yellowed, Helen concluded that the find had not lain in the ground for very long, thinking that nothing bad would happen if she found out what her grandfather was trying to get before his death. Helen began to study the find. It was clearly written by my grandmother. "My dear George, I'm writing you a note, realizing that I have very little time left in this world, and I don't think I have the right to take this secret with me. Forgive me, George, for many years ago, because of love for you, I committed deception and even a crime. It's hard to admit, but it's necessary. You and I were already married then. They sent my daughter to kindergarten, and I returned to work at the post office. Everything was fine with us, so I envied myself. And then I saw a letter addressed to you. The sender was a certain woman. My heart immediately felt bad. I didn't give you the letter. I secretly read it myself. That's how I found out about your novel. Your sweetheart reported that it was her strict father who arranged your separation back in 1964. He threatened to kill you or put you in jail using his connections. In fact, he left her the only way, to tell you, looking into your eyes, that he doesn't love you at all and doesn't want to see you ever again. The mother tried to stand up for her daughter, but it did not help. The woman was simply beaten by her own husband because she dared to say a word in defiance. I looked at what your father had done and was terribly afraid for you. That's why she said convincingly everything she was told. After this cruel confession, you predictably flared up, packed your things, took an apple tree seedling as a souvenir for your parents and returned. Lexons of a woman in the letter reported that she was pregnant with your child, and to cover up her sin, she was married off without an official signature to some widower with numerous children in a remote settlement that didn't even have a name. I read the letter in the dark, wet with tears, and even began to sympathize with your young beloved. She complained that her family life did not work out. The man with whom she had to live perceived her as a servant, but despite the scandals with relatives, Alina named the girl she was born your daughter in honor of her mother Sophie. The unfortunate young mother found herself literally in slavery. She endured beatings, humiliation, and tirelessly planned her escape. When my daughter began to grow up, Alien became even heavier. The native children of this so-called husband began to mock the girl, and her mother could not say a word in defense. The beatings began immediately. Only 5 years later, Alien still managed to escape from her husband. She did not give details, but because even the letters at this point were blurred from tears spilled on the paper, it was clear it was very difficult. Alien asked that you come to these very settlements for her and her daughter. She wrote that she would be waiting for you. When I read the letter, it was as if I had gone blind and deaf at the same time. I really didn't understand how I should continue to live. Giving you the messages meant losing my family, and our son was only 3 years old. How could I deprive his father with my own hands? How would he grow up without you? I repent. That first letter, I then destroyed it and threw it in the oven. I thought I protected my family. I shouldn't have hoped. Alien continued to send letters. The next one came almost a year later. Apparently, she planned for you to receive news from her and your daughter on your birthday. She asked why you don't answer her. How scared I was then that she would get ready and come to you. The distance is not particularly long, maybe a little more than 300 kilometers or something like that. It turns out that almost next door to us live those who are capable of destroying my life. If I can burn the letters, then the problem with Sophie is more complicated. What am I supposed to do with the woman and child? I started thinking about how I could prevent them from coming to you. I wrote a letter copying your handwriting on your behalf just in case. I promised that I would come as soon as I could. You probably don't even remember how I tried to persuade you to move, but you never agreed. So I lived like on a volcano. I didn't know how to protect my happiness, how to preserve it if you found out the truth about yours. At work, I also didn't take any vacation or sick leave because of this. Then you realized, 5 years later, that only once a year does this woman bother you. I felt a little better. I burned the letters for a long time, several years, and then I felt ashamed. I started hiding them. I knew that there were places in the house that you would never think of getting into. The only thing is, because of my own fears, I couldn't leave my post office and refused the more promising position. Well, it's okay, I'm used to it. How long did she write to you? But I only saved 10 messages with the last letter that arrived in 1994, and I acted completely meanly. And that she wrote that her health had become completely bad and that she needed medication. And although Sophie tries to support her, there's always not enough money. It's clear. It was such a time then, the whole country was in a fever. She didn't ask for anything for herself. But, of course, I couldn't completely calm down. What if the difficult one brings her to our region? What if she decides to see you? I carefully printed this envelope and returned it with the note the addressee has left. After that, the stream of letters from Alien completely dried up. Why should I have done this before? And I don't understand it myself. There wouldn't be a problem in the first place. And now I don't know what to do with the letters. By right and conscience, you should read them, but not during my lifetime. So, when you find out the bitter story of Ali and your daughter, I will no longer be there. Sorry for being selfish, but I couldn't do otherwise. She loved you too much and didn't want to leave her son without a father. Now I don't care anymore. Gina has also grown up a long time ago, and his granddaughter is a bride. So the path to Alien is clear. I only ask you one thing. Wait at least a year after I leave before looking for your first love and daughter, whom you have never seen. Maintain this period of mourning in honor of all the good things that happened between us. And then do as your heart tells you. Forgive me for everything. Loving you, Kristen. Helen was shocked when she read the note. The story of tragic love, many years of deception, and difficult confession involuntarily touched her. The girl thought that probably Kristen's grandmother should have kept her secret forever. On the other hand, she understood that this was too cowardly. Of course, it's easier to judge from the outside than to find yourself in such a stalemate, and Helen couldn't imagine what she would have done in her grandmother's place. Would you immediately tell your legal husband that his friend still loves him and is waiting for him, together with their common daughter, or would you try by any means within your imagination to protect him from this literally stunning information? It became clear to Helen what Grandpa George wanted to talk to her about. Surely, since the 1-year reprieve that Grandmother Kristen asked him for was coming to an end, he wanted to get advice on how to find his old lover. After all, a lot of time has passed, and it is possible that this alien has long since changed the common surname Smith. Her daughter, Helen's blood sister and her father's daughter, could also probably be married. Trying to distract myself from the unexpected information received, Helen put the papers back into the box, put it in the closet, and began reading the letters that alien had sent to her grandfather. You never know what other details of the personal life of a loved one will be revealed. So alone, except for the cat, she fell into a light sleep. It was boring, and Helen started cleaning, although there was no particular need for this. The girl took out a bucket of dirty water to throw it into the far corner of the site and saw a car drive up to the gate. Helen's parents, who had finally returned from abroad, got out of the car and she was incredibly happy. Even though this meeting was tinged with bitterness, at least the worry for the parents receded from the heart. During the confused conversation, it turned out that they had arrived in a place where there was no connection or access to the internet. Michael and Anne, having reached civilization, received a sad message from their daughter just before the funeral of Grandfather George and hurried to return, but were still late. Helen was glad that she now had the support she needed so much. After hugs and tears, when everyone was already sitting at the table, the girl began to tell her dad and mom about the unusual find. To prove her words, the girl took out a box from the closet and together with her parents. She once again read aloud Grandma Kristen's handwritten confession, and then they studied the surviving letters. One of them contained a photo from a photo studio. It depicted two pretty girls, and there was clearly a kinship in the appearance of the beauties. But they looked more like sisters with a not very big age difference. However, the inscription on the back of the photograph indicated that this was the first love of Grandfather George and their common daughter Sophie. In beautiful handwriting it was written, "In memory of my beloved George from Alien and Sophie on her 16th birthday. We look forward to meeting you. 1981. Michael, forgetting about his respectability, even whistled, "Yes." To say that I'm surprised is to say nothing at all. How did Mom manage to keep all this a secret for so many years and not give away her knowledge? I can't even imagine. Anne, who had a wonderful relationship with her calm mother-in-law, contrary to all stereotypes and ideas about the peculiarities of the family way of life, was also perplexed. They had so many heart-to-heart conversations, but Kristen never said a word that somewhere far away her official husband had a beloved and illegitimate daughter. It was not easy to come to terms with such news. Anne asked, "Do you think we should find your sister and her mother, if she's still alive, of course, or let everything remain as it is?" The man himself did not know how to react to what was happening. Judging by what he learned from his daughter, the father wanted the secret of his youth to be known. On the other hand, is it ethical now to intrude into the fate of a stranger, but a woman related by blood? She appears to be about 50 years old now, and this same alien is most likely now approaching 70. A reminder of her difficult youth and the man she once loved so much but never got to see could be harmful to her health. In addition, as Kristen's grandmother wrote, after she sent back the letter marked the addressee has dropped out, they stopped coming at all. This could mean that alien believed the lie or that she was desperate. However, alas, the most unfavorable events in the fate of the woman and her daughter could have happened, Bryn said, as if voicing her thoughts out loud. But still, it seems to me that we should at least try to find my grandfather's daughter just to somehow rehabilitate him. After all, it's not Grandpa George's fault that everything turned out this way. I think it would be fair if the whole truth became known to Alien, and of course Sophie. Listen, Dad. The girl turned to Michael. How do you feel knowing that you have an older blood sister? Do you want to see her and chat? The man was confused and asked his daughter in response. And you, Helen, this is Sophie. Actually, Auntie, that's what you have to do. It turns out that it's interesting to meet her. Helen listened to herself and admitted, curious and a little scary. Her opinions in the family were divided. Anne, after listening to her husband and daughter, said, "It seems to me that we should leave everything as it is. There is no need now to disturb something that has long been forgotten. More than half a century has passed. Maybe this alien is happy with another person. And hello, meet, so to speak, relatives." I think this is not entirely correct. A long conversation did not help find a compromise. In addition, all family members themselves were not sure of the correctness of their thoughts. As a result, the father went to bed in order to visit the place of George's final resting place in the morning. "Sorry, Dad, I'm late," Michael whispered, standing by a fresh mound covered with wreaths. "I never could have imagined that we wouldn't see each other again." The man put 4 scarlet carnations on the empty space and bowed his head, hiding his tears. After Michael, flowers were laid on George's grave by his daughter-in-law and granddaughter. Each of the grieving relatives realized that they were subconsciously waiting for a sign on how to deal with the information that had fallen on them. They didn't talk about it out loud, but Michael, Anne, and Helen were waiting for a revelation to descend on them. Perhaps it was naive and stupid, but I would really like to know what George himself wanted. No matter how much they hoped for a clue, they could not get it, and with a heavy heart, they returned to the apartment. We decided that Michael would live in the house for now, and that his wife and daughter would come to him in their free time. While Anne helped her husband pack at least the minimum necessary things, Helen hurried to the nearest store to buy some special food that was tastier for the yearning cat. The girl felt very sorry for the cat, who seemed to have suddenly lost his luster and lost his previously excellent appetite. After consulting with a serious-looking woman who was busily putting bags of wet food into the cart, Helen collected some gifts for her grandfather's pet and returned home, handing her dad a bag of food. "And my dear, I'll ask. He is now a little capricious and may refuse food. Try to feed him from the palm of your hand. He usually starts eating as a sign of respect." And Tuis smiled at his daughter. "No, don't worry. I won't offend the tailed one. The days flew by. Just keep up with them." Helen, her mother, went to work, and in the evenings they talked about everything, as the girls were accustomed to from early childhood. Of course, they also talked about the secret that Grandma Kristen had been hiding for. We decided to gather our relatives. We sat together mentally, remembering various incidents from the past. Michael carefully tried to beg it from his great-uncle. "Stepan, can you tell us anything about Dad's youth?" The older man was happy to talk. George was always brave for any good cause, responsive and decisive. When he returned from the army, he went to the factory to get a job in the personnel department. As his mother later said, he heard from someone that young people from our city were sent to build villages and do household work. It was no longer a new thing then. Everyone in the country wanted to help. The people acted in unison. So George, after returning from military service, decided that he would be more useful there. I admit, I also wanted to go with him, but where should I go? In total at that time, I was 15 years old. George is 5 years older than me. In general, he went far. Fortunately, in the Army, he learned to drive a truck and received a license. He returned almost 5 years later. I brought saplings as if as a souvenir of my long business trip. Of course, he has changed during this time. A naive boy left, but an almost grown man returned. Not because I'm related, but to be fair, I'll say that George definitely hasn't become any worse. I think she can find such Sophie now. His hands are golden and his character is worthy. When here at the automobile plant, they accepted him with open arms. Teetotal, hardworking, honest. What more could you ask for? Hungry for work, and so he will take off his last shirt and give it to someone else. Oh, and the men respected him. No matter what, he never refused. Well, women generally died for him, and he treated everyone very respectfully. Then he married Kristen. She worked at the post office, and somehow the company car broke down, and George was driving by and couldn't leave his fellow driver in trouble. That's how we met. We met briefly and signed, and see, my mother was even offended. It seemed like the holiday was squeezed. But since you, Gina, were born, George was happy. Here in the yard, relatives, neighbors, and colleagues staged a big party. Everyone was invited. It seemed like there weren't any delicacies on the table, but come on, that's not the main thing. It turns out that the atmosphere is much more important. Yes, there was a time when all the neighbors lived almost like relatives. Stefan Alexandrovich interrupted his memories to quench his thirst with a cool, tasty compote. And although he didn't manage to learn anything new that his son didn't know, it was still nice to hear kind words addressed to George. After only Michael, Anne, and Helen remained in the house, the female part of the family cleaned up, leaving the only man, apart from the cat, to dismantle the makeshift benches. Helen went to bed on her favorite cot, and she had a strange, incredibly realistic dream. The girl was not even afraid when she saw Grandfather George at his favorite apple tree. The man stood under the tree, gently stroking the bark and looking at his granddaughter, asking, "When the apples ripen, take a few and give them to those you know. Don't forget, Helen. Please don't forget." Grandfather George looked somewhere, relations of just trying to see what was happening behind his granddaughter's shoulder. Helen turned to see what or who interested the man, but it was empty. When the girl's gaze returned to the apple tree, Grandfather was no longer under the canopy. Outside the window, birds whistled and sang, tearing Helen out of the captivity of sleep, which left behind a vivid impression. There were no doubts left. Grandfather George conveyed the news, the very sign that was so missing to make the right decision. Of course, he made his desire clear. At his request, Chris and Helen must go on a trip in the fall so that her grandfather's longtime beloved and their common daughter will find out the whole truth. Shocked, Helen did not hide from her parents that she saw Grandfather George in a dream. Michael was even a little annoyed that the late father in his dreams visited not him, but his granddaughter. But wise Anne supported both her husband and daughter, so it was necessary. There, beyond reality, there are probably its own rules. In anticipation of the holiday, the whole family began preparing for Helen's upcoming trip. The girls' attempts to find Enya and Sophie on social networks were unsuccessful, although she patiently looked through hundreds of pages of users from various regions, and not just from that area. Helen planned to hit the road on the first day of her vacation, so as not to delay the resolution of the issue, which had already been postponed for many years by the will of Kristen's grandmother. The girls' parents, trying not to show their excitement, helped their daughter get ready. They reacted most responsibly to the upcoming transportation of apples, which Grandfather ordered to take with and placed a rectangular basket without a handle in a rather compact but roomy sports bag. She carefully placed the ripe fruits there, laying each layer with parchment paper on her husband's advice, and the main load, carefully covered with a towel, was packed. Helen added the minimum amount of things to her bag and hit the road. At the girl's request, her parents only accompanied her to the taxi, and although the daughter promised to call and report the results of the search, Anne and Michael were worried about their daughter. It is not at all a fact that the search expedition will be successful, and a meeting with a woman from George Ilyach's past could lead to completely unpredictable results. Thanks to a carefully thought-out route and the absence of any unforeseen circumstances, Helen easily reached the village from where Grandfather George had been receiving letters for so long, some of which he was able to read only after his wife's death. The local villages seemed to the girl to be quite a cozy settlement. The coming autumn had already touched the trees with gold and made the village especially picturesque. Private houses coexisted peacefully with apartment buildings, near which in some places there were small vegetable gardens and even greenhouses. The girl approached the house, the address of which was indicated on the envelope. An intercom was installed on the entrance door of a typical 5-story building, and Helen froze for a few seconds in indecision. She, although she was preparing mentally for the trip and even diligently prepared a short speech before the difficult explanation, suddenly became scared. Having overcome herself, Helen typed the number of the apartment she was interested in on the keyboard. Hearing a pleasant female voice from the speakers of the device, the girl asked, "May he shucked. Hello, excuse me, please. Can I talk to Alien and her daughter Sophie? Come in." It came from the speaker, and the door opened. Helen was very surprised that the stranger, whose voice sounded from the speakers, did not ask her either her name or the purpose of meeting her. But there was no time to think. Breathing deeply to calm down, the girl went up to the second floor she needed, where a not-quite-old woman was already waiting for her behind the open door. Helen peered into her face, but in vain. I tried to recognize the stranger Sophie. How, given the fact that in the photograph she was captured at the height of her young 16 years and more than 3 decades had passed, it was unlikely that such drastic changes could have occurred. Outwardly, the woman was of a completely different type, and she looked at most about 40 years old, maybe a little bit older. Is it possible to accurately determine age by the appearance of modern women who take care of themselves, to which the stranger undoubtedly belonged? Helen greeted warmly. Hello again. I was the one who bothered you. Tell me, please, how can I talk to Alien and Sophie? The woman conducted the conversation freely, even in a brotherly way, as if she had known Helen for many years. Hello, if you're not joking. From what regions did you come? The question surprised Helen, but she answered honestly, although she did not understand why it mattered. The woman, hearing the name of the city, softened and invited her to enter the apartment, where she asked another strange question. What are your grandfather's last names? My grandfather's last name on my father's side is Johnson, and on my mother's side, Adrian. The uttered phrase had a strange effect on the woman. She didn't ask any more questions. She began to fuss. Despite Helen's excuses, she led her into the kitchen through her plate of delicious rosy pies. She offered tea, coffee, homemade compote, and, holding out a glass of sweet drink to the guests, my mom's best friend was Sophie. She was like a caring nanny and an older sister to me. They survived together even when there was nothing special to eat except potatoes grown in a vacant lot. Meat was seen occasionally. Alien, as she was planting, was so worried and afraid, and she hoped that one day they would look for her. I firmly told my mother not to tell anyone how to find her and her daughter, except for the man with the last name Johnson or his descendants. She was deeply in love with a certain George Johnson. The daughter is the fruit of their sinful and sweet love. Yes, that's right, George Johnson, my grandfather. Helen confirmed her comment. He passed away recently. Only after this did it become clear that his first love and their common daughter once lived here in your apartment at this very address. It's not Grandpa George's fault that he didn't find them earlier. This is how the circumstances developed. The landlady took a notebook from the closet, tore out a piece of paper, took a pen and flipped through the pages. I began to rewrite something, not forgetting to show cordiality. You eat, drink. Perhaps you rushed here straight from the station. Refresh yourself. Otherwise, in order to meet Alien or daughter to meet again on the road, you will have to go to another city. They moved. We had to, although it was incredibly difficult for us to part. They became almost family. But after Aunt Alien encountered an acquaintance of the man who kept her as a slave, she was afraid to stay here. It's easier to get lost in a big city. Here you go. I texted you their address and Sophie's phone number to arrange a meeting. Knowing Aunt Alien, I am sure that she is still waiting for news about her beloved. But it's better if you and Sophie discuss the time and place of the meeting. Things aren't going well in their house. My daughter got an extremely nasty husband. When I saw him for the first time, can you imagine? I was even scared. It seems like a person is standing, smiling at you, and his eyes are contemptuous and angry. As my aunt later told me, he helped my daughter a lot in some way when she got a new job in the city, and she fell in love without noticing any of his shortcomings. When I saw it, it was too late, like a fly caught in a web. No matter how hard his aunt tries to get him away from his daughter, it just doesn't work. The woman fell silent. Apparently, she herself was worried about this situation, but she did not know how to help the woman whom she considered practically her sister. Helen tried not to look like she was from a hungry region, but she was also unable to refuse the tasty treat and belatedly remembered the rules of etiquette. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, Helen. My name is. Thank you very much. Your pies are very tasty and the compote is simply wonderful. The woman was very cutely embarrassed. Me? Come on. It's me who attacked with interrogation. My name is Alice. By the way, an alien taught me to cook. She is generally a master at cooking. Listen, Helen, do you have money for the trip? A taxi will cost more, but it will be faster than taking a train. Sorry, it's not much, but I can give you $50. Helen was deeply shocked by this proposal. Alice seems to be a completely modern young woman in her simple-minded and open behavior, like good characters from old films that grandparents love to watch. Such a friendly attitude brought tears to Helen's eyes, and she hastened to calm Alice down. Don't worry, my finances are fine. Thank you, Alice. I'm very glad to meet you. Thank you for the treat. It's time to move on. Helen looked at the cost of a taxi to her destination in the app and sighed. Yes, you're right. The price tag is something incredible. It doesn't matter. I'd love to take a ride on the train. Alice didn't let her guess go so easily. Mate. Now we'll look at the schedule of electric trains and passing trains on the internet. Maybe we'll even book a ticket right away. Why are you toiling around in the waiting room in vain? It's better to keep me company here. It's true." Helen nodded, agreeing with Alice's wisdom. But the precaution turned out to be unnecessary. It turned out that given the time it takes to get to the station, you almost have to say goodbye to the hospitable woman. Almost leaving the apartment, Helen hesitated for a while. Opening the bag, she took out several large fragrant apples and handed them to Alice. "Here, these are apples from my grandfather's orchard. They are very tasty. I don't know how else to thank you for such a warm welcome." Alice was embarrassed again, but accepted the apples. "I can't resist such an incredible aroma and beauty. They are just like the picture. Say hi to Sophie. By the way, I'll probably, with your permission, warn her that you're going to see them. Let her somehow prepare an Oya. Otherwise, you never know. The blood pressure will jump, the heart will catch, or something else." Helen had no objections, and having said a warm goodbye to her new friend, the girl went to the station. Already with the sound of wheels, she sent her parents a detailed story about how the responsive Alice greeted her. She said that Alien and Sophie had moved, but she had their new address. The mother, who was clearly worried about her daughter, responded almost instantly and asked her to be careful on the road. The girl with a light heart promised to look around carefully and not get involved in any dubious adventures. Fortunately, the situation in the carriage was quite calm. Someone peered thoughtfully at the landscape outside the window, becoming less and less visible due to the approaching darkness. Some of the random fellow passengers were dozing, and Helen regretted that she could not, like most passengers in the carriage, immerse herself in communication with a smartphone. The charge level forced me to refrain from this luxury. Almost at the moment when the previous day crossed the border of night to remain forever in the past, Helen found herself in an ancient town standing on the... The girl thought with belated regret that she had not thought to book a hotel room in advance, because showing up at a stranger's apartment at such a late time was somehow completely awkward. The girl felt a little uneasy, but ordering herself not to be a coward, she quickly figured out how to get to the nearest hotel before her smartphone was completely discharged. Luck was with Helen. The administrator, smiling, even seemed to sincerely offer a small, but, in her words, a very cozy room. Soon Helen settled into her temporary housing and, having put her smartphone on charge, took a shower, had dinner, and lay down on the... Although it was late, the mattress was comfortable, no loud sounds penetrated the hotel room, and there was no sleep in either eye. Still, there is a meeting in the morning, for which she went on a trip, and the anxiety appeared again. The girl was thinking for the 100th time about what to say to the innocent victim of deception and how to apologize for her grandmother, and in general, in what style to conduct the conversation. After all, if, with the good-natured Alice, everything somehow turned out very naturally, this does not mean that communication with Ale and Sophie will be just as pleasant. Although she managed to fall asleep only in the morning, Helen woke up a few minutes before the alarm clock, thanks to the girl's youth. The anxious night did not leave any noticeable marks on her appearance, and at 10, she decided to call Sophie. The woman answered almost instantly. It seemed as if she was expecting this call. It is quite likely that this was the case. After all, it's not very often that there are such meetings of relatives who had no idea about each other. Having quickly agreed to meet in one of the cafes located near the hotel, Sophie was the first to end the conversation. Surprisingly, the choice of a neutral public place for the meeting finally calmed Helen, for whom her recent acquaintance with Alice made the most pleasant and even encouraging impression. Well, such a sweet, kind woman simply cannot be friends and consider bad Sophie her family. This means that they are at least quite adequate. In addition, in a cafe surrounded by Sophie, she is unlikely to reach a violent expression of emotions, and there is less risk that Alien will get too nervous. The girl transferred the basket of apples into a spacious shopping bag, which she had prudently taken with her, and went to the meeting. As Helen approached the cafe, she noticed a slender woman on the porch of the establishment, in whose features it was quite possible to see the girl from the photograph from the letter. The girl was the first to say hello and introduce herself. "Hey, hello, Sophie. I'm Helen Johnson. It turns out that my grandfather is your dad," the woman smiled. "Very nice. I tell you quite sincerely, Alice told me that she had wonderful impressions of communication, and her opinion, as life has shown, must be trusted. But let's go. I'll introduce you to Mom, and we'll talk calmly. She's waiting for us inside." The acquaintance procedure turned out to be unusually calm. Alien behaved affably, but with poorly concealed interest peering into the face of the granddaughter of her beloved man. To somehow break the prolonged silence, Helen handed the woman a bag. "Here, these are apples from your grandfather's orchard." Alien looked up from studying her face and, looking inside the bag, gasped, "No." The woman carefully took out one fruit, looking at it, holding it tenderly, as if the apple were a living creature, and, without addressing either Helen or her daughter, she spoke quietly. It was noticeable that she wanted to express all the accumulated pain. "George and I once dreamed that we would live in a house near which an apple tree would definitely grow. Not just like a fruit tree, but also seemingly in honor of me. What a pity that our dreams did not come true. When we met, I was only 15 years old. However, in my native land, all girls grow up early, mature for family life with a loved one. George was 9 years older. This age difference did not bother me at all. I deceived him. She said that they were already adults, and he couldn't even think that I was lying. We loved each other, forgetting about everything in the world. Probably as punishment for my lies and this sin, higher powers forced me to. Moreover, this terrible punishment also affects my daughter." The woman stroked the hand of her daughter sitting next to her, who blushed like boiled crayfish and fell silent. Helen, listening and without interrupting, "It's not at all that higher powers intervened in your life. Everything is much simpler and more offensive. Grandfather George, I received some of your letters only after the death of my wife, my grandmother." Helen told in detail everything she knew, and, not forgetting to mention her strange dream. "Someday, mate, so I came here so that you know everything. Both my parents and I thought it would be fair. I'm very sorry that your love had such a tragic story. But now nothing can be fixed." Lillian held an apple in one hand, pressing it to her heart with her palm, and with the other she wiped away the tears that stubbornly rolled down her cheeks. Neither Sophie nor Helen knew what to say or how to calm the woman in this grief. The silence was like an unspoken minute of silence over George's death. "They haven't ordered drinks or food yet." Alien, as if waking up from a daze, suggested, "My dears, maybe we can walk along the street. I'm missing some air." Helen and Sophie agreed without hesitation, although the waiter, who did not wait for the order or at least a tip, simply looked unhappy. Nobody cared about him. 3 representatives of the fair sex reflected on the vicissitudes of fate and how outside interference destroys the most wonderful dreams. My daughter wanted to take the bag of apples, but Alien stopped her. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to part with these apples." Fortunately, the long handles made it possible to hang the bag on your shoulder, so it wasn't too heavy to carry. Alien asked Helen to tell everything she knew about her grandfather. What kind of work he did, what programs he liked to watch, what he liked to eat, and other everyday little things. The woman seemed to absorb the moments that had passed her by and smiled quietly. Perhaps she imagined that she herself had lived next to him all these years. The almost idyllic walk was interrupted by the ringtone of Sophie's mobile phone. The man who called shouted so loudly that even at a distance of the alley, Helen heard everything he said. "No, why the hell aren't you at home or at work? I was in a hurry on purpose, driving like crazy. And everything is like in a bad joke. Where are you going? Look, if I find out that you're cheating on me, I'll kill everyone, and you and your mother will fly out of my apartment like little kids." Stately Sophie, listening to the tirade, seemed to become smaller in stature. The lights in her eyes went out, and she answered briefly, "I'll be there now." Alien became noticeably agitated. It seems that the voice of the man who called was well known to her, and this man did not evoke the slightest positive emotions in her. Sophie began to say goodbye to Helen and then turned to her mother. "Listen, I'll run. Boris seems to be on edge already, and you can talk some more. You probably would like to talk about a lot of things." She hurried to leave, and from that moment, the casual conversation seemed to evaporate. The girl understood. The woman was terribly afraid for her daughter, who, as it was easy to understand, was in a relationship with a real tyrant. Soon Alien confirmed the guess of her young companion. "I have the impression that my bitter story of slavery and the power of a cruel, domineering man is now being continued by my daughter. She, however, got married, unlike me, quite officially, and even out of great love. That's how it seemed at least 15 years ago. I was so happy for my daughter. Boris always treated me, and even more so her, with respect. But as soon as he managed to persuade me to add my savings to a shared apartment, the relationship began to deteriorate instantly, gradually. One thing didn't suit him, then another. while I was huddled separately in a rented room separate from my daughter and son-in-law. I had no idea how everything really was. Then, 5 years ago, I became seriously ill and went on long sick leave. In general, I had to ask Boris to come to their 2-room apartment. It seems that I felt that I had the moral right to do this, but, of course, I felt uneasy. Nothing. She hid her pride somewhere far away and asked to stay with her daughter and Boris. Then I saw that not everything was fine with them. There are always some complaints against my daughter, jealousy, hurtful words. In a milder version than before, the monster oppressed me, but every reproach against Sophie was a punishment for me. Recently, he began to accuse me of infertility, although he himself always repeated that children were not included in his life plans. I get the impression that he is provoking Sophie to divorce, and then when we exchange the apartment, we will get some kind of closet. I now clearly understand that Boris will share everything thoroughly down to every spoon, and that she and I are like 2 blades of grass that can be broken like spitting. I have no legal education. Sophie is also far from this. We cannot afford a good lawyer financially. Helen did not know how to console the unhappy woman who had never in her life been able to lean on a reliable man's shoulder. Instead of rushing into battle with all the troubles yourself, it seems that friendship with Alice's mother is the only bright spot in her life, even if it was not easy. But when no one tries to solve the problems, it is at least morally easier. As soon as I lost my permanent job and started baking at home, the fragile balance collapsed. Somehow everything went downhill, although the standard of living even seemed to become higher. I can probably pay for my rented apartment again, but here's the irony of fate. I simply began to fear for my daughter's health. How afraid I am that Boris will start raising his hand against Sophie. And now there's something uneasy in my heart, as if some kind of trouble is approaching. Helen, I don't want to involve you in our family squabbles, but come to us, please. With you. Boris should moderate his ambition. He always does this in the presence of strangers, enthusiastically and even selflessly. Plays the role of an exemplary husband. If you ask our neighbors, everyone will probably unanimously say that my Sophie is incredibly lucky to have him. Helen immediately agreed to join us. Soon, after traveling a few bus stops and walking a little along the street, they found themselves inside the apartment. A muffled male voice was heard from one of the rooms. Now I'll teach you how to greet your husband, because in such fools as you need to put the thought into not wagging your tail in the absence of your legal spouse. Alien opened the door and saw Boris grab Sophie by the neck, lifting her off the floor. In a state of some kind of irrational anger, the woman took the bag of apples from her shoulder and hit her son-in-law on the head with it. The man, having let go of his victim, as if knocked down, collapsed on the floor, freezed from coughing. Mom, what are you doing? What fly bit you? What if you broke Borea's skull? Len slowly walked up to the sofa, sat down on it, and asked, Sophie, nothing will happen to Boris. Better bring me some water with a sedative. My heart is starting to pound. Helen, meanwhile, looked closely at the man. He was clearly not too stunned and was already trying to get up. He looked dumbfounded. Boris was in no hurry to get up and, rubbing the back of his head, angrily collapsed on Alien and began to threaten. Don't even think that this will be in vain. I'll go and film the beatings at the emergency room and put you, the senile old woman, behind bars. Sophie's hand shook as she handed the cup of medicine to her mother. The woman began to persuade Boris not to get excited, but he only became more unruly and uttered threats. You'll go and eat gruel until you die, and then you'll die in a government house. And with your health, there's no point in being there. Unexpectedly, Boris's tirade was interrupted by Helen, who unwillingly, along with her grandfather and father, watched a variety of detective series and had, albeit small, but valuable experience in calming down even the most inappropriate office visitors and presumptuous suppliers. First of all, I'll call the police here right now. I saw with my own eyes how you tried to harm Sophie. So Alien's actions may well qualify as causing grievous bodily harm in self-defense, but you may have much more serious problems. Believe me. Helen herself could not understand how she had the audacity to tell an adult man some numbers of articles of the criminal code emerging from the depths of the subconscious. Stress probably took its toll. She used some legal terms so boldly that Boris, under the furious pressure of the stranger, noticeably became shy, and then, carefully getting up, left the room, saying to his wife, "You're lucky that I have a strong head, otherwise I would have become a widow." When the man left, Helen sat down on the sofa next to Alien. The woman began to apologize to the guest. Sorry, Helen, that this happened. Low inside the girl was still shaking with anger. She managed to answer almost calmly. There's nothing to apologize for at all. Sophie, standing near the wall, listened to what was happening in the kitchen where Boris had gone, and then she rushed there, surprising her mother and Helen. The man was busy climbing through the cabinets in a fit of rage. He threw everything out of them right onto the floor, quietly called out to her son-in-law. Boris, calm down. I hid my stash a long time ago. As soon as I noticed that the bills began to gradually disappear from there. You won't find anything in the kitchen, don't hope. The man, not knowing where he was stepping, crushed cereals and pasta, left the kitchen, almost knocked down Sophie, who was in his way, and soon slammed the door loudly. And Sophie began to clean up the consequences of the destruction caused by Boris, and Helen, without thinking for long, joined them. In response to the hostess's objections, the girl admitted, "Partly I feel a little guilty for everything that happened, so of course I won't stand aside." The mess in the kitchen was almost eliminated when Boris appeared in the doorway, accompanied by a man in a police uniform. Hello. Boris invited me to look into the circumstances of the beating. Lillian sank into a chair, exhausted. Sophie looked angrily at her husband, who, on the contrary, was jubilant. While the women were cleaning up, he made a fuss and literally dragged a law enforcement officer into the apartment, greatly exaggerating the scale of the conflict, naturally, without telling you that before the ill-fated blow to the back of the head, he almost sent his wife to the next world. Helen was amazed at Boris's impudence and blurted out to eliminate the possibility of a dirty trick from this man with a rotten and petty soul. "Excuse me, can I see your ID?" The lieutenant presented the documents and began the interview. While Elena began to talk about what happened, Helen asked permission to call. The policeman did not interfere, and the girl hurried to dial her father's number. Michael listened to his daughter without interrupting, and then said, "In general, Victor will call you back now. He is well versed in such matters. You put the phone on speakerphone, and I think he will be able to resolve this situation favorably and without unnecessary hassle." Helen's father was not mistaken. Boris's triumphant appearance melted as, during a telephone conversation, the policeman, seeing red prints on Sophie's neck, began to cast disapproving glances at the impudent man. The lawyer insisted that the lieutenant also accept a statement from the woman who had been attacked by her husband. And this speech had a wonderful effect. After the mutually amiable completion of telephone conversations, the man sternly asked Boris, "Are you still saying that your wife's mother hit you with a heavy bag for no reason at all?" The picture of this incident is completely different. You, Boris, practically made a false call and even lied. This case, unfortunately, is not subject to jurisdiction, but it is quite possible to run into a fine. Now I will write everything down as it happened and warn you right away. You don't need to deceive me anymore. When Alien showed her terrible remedy, which she applied to her son-in-law, the policeman could hardly contain his smile and involuntarily admired the large, elegant apples. Boris, having read and signed the document drawn up, showered curses and abuse on his wife, her mother, and their young intercessor who had come from nowhere. The district police officer reprimanded the man, and he left the apartment in a rage. The policeman, turning to Sophie, said, "I will advise you simply as a human being. Do not tolerate such an attitude. Further, as experience shows, similar marriages do not lead to anything good. It's not too late to get a divorce." Sophie thanked the district police officer. "Thank you for your informal approach. We handled the situation fairly." Alien put almost half of the apples Helen had brought in a bag to the district police officer and handed it over with the words, "Please accept it as a token of gratitude. I am very embarrassed that my intemperance caused my son-in-law to disturb you." The district police officer shrugged his shoulders, saying that's the job. And then, as if having thrown off the plaque, he formally asked with admiration in his voice, "How did you manage to grow such beautiful apples? At my parents' dacha this year, almost the entire harvest was destroyed by hail at the ovary stage. What was not beaten rotted during the frost." Alien smiled. I myself didn't expect to admire such apples. This is a famous variety. The defender generously brought these apples to us from another region, where a seedling was delivered many years ago from a southern country by a very good person, despite the difference in climate. The tree has taken root. The police officer thanked him again for the apples, dictated his phone number just in case, and saying goodbye, left the apartment. despite the successful solution to the problem. Boris's petty revenge in the form of calling the police turned out to be a rather exhausting event for everyone, Bale jokingly stating, "That's it, we've had enough cleaning for today. Where has this been seen? A girl came to visit us, and we gave her a broom and dustpan. That's it, girls, let's set the table in my room. With this hoard, we will be completely starved." Helen was removed from preparing for the feast, and she hurried to call her dad to report that the conversation with the lawyer had helped her get out of a very difficult situation. Michael and Anne, who knew a noticeably softened version of events from her husband, were relieved when their daughter reported this information. Still, even at 24 years old, Helen remained for her parents the same beloved little girl whom they wanted to protect, to cover with their care like a dome, impenetrable to all kinds of evil. As Alice said, Anna turned out to be an incredibly skilled craftswoman when it comes to food. Helen enjoyed trying the seemingly simple but extremely tasty bassifier. After tea with delicious and homemade sweets, Sophie asked her guest, "Can we arrange a video conference on Skype with your dad? I would like to get to know my half-brother at least in this remote way." Helen admitted, "My parents also asked me about this, but I didn't know how to offer it. Is it convenient?" Alien threw out her hands. His daughter, "My clever girl, what a good idea you came up with. Come on quickly, set everything up." Just a few minutes later, an image of Michael appeared on the laptop screen. First of all, the man began to ask Alien for forgiveness. "It's difficult for me to talk about this, but the happiness of my parents' family and my, in fact, carefree childhood were actually built on the foundation of your misfortunes. Most likely, if letters from you had fallen into the hands of your father earlier, he would probably have found a way to help you. However, my mother was most likely afraid that he would give up everything and ask for a divorce. And he will go to you and his daughter, whom he never had the chance to meet. I sincerely apologize to you, Sophie. I want you to know that you can always count on me. Helen will leave you my phone number and other contacts. Contact us anytime you need it." Helen sat with the hospitable hostesses until the evening, listening and talking about herself and her family. Despite the rather strange circumstances of meeting, no one felt the slightest awkwardness. "I didn't even think that I would suddenly have such a wonderful niece." Alien, named Sophie for Helen, saw in her a subtle, almost imperceptible resemblance to George. Similar facial features, dimples, the funny habit of wrinkling your nose and frowning when you smile. For so many years, the woman remembered the only man she loved desperately, and then, as if out of habit, she hoped to meet. And now there is no more chance to see each other. It was incredibly sad, and there was only one consolation. George did not forget her and did not betray her. I naively believed what she said then. That's the only thing she could reproach him for, even if she wanted to. Countless times, Alien imagined that she had handled that fateful conversation differently. If only then, more than half a century ago, she had only found the courage to tell her beloved that her father was threatening to kill him if she had offered to run away. However, George would probably have found a more correct way to solve the problem. If only she had honestly told him everything many years ago. Most likely they would now be together as they dreamed. Maybe for Sophie, who would have felt the care and support of her father in her personal life, everything would have turned out much more successfully. Everything would have been much better. And she would not have gotten involved with this slippery, nasty Boris. They incredibly regretted that she was unable to protect her fragile love. But she couldn't blame the woman who became George's legal wife for this. In the end, it was she, even under pressure, who rejected her loved one. This means there is no point in looking for someone to blame on the side. The day turned out to be long, eventful, and after a hearty meal and long conversations, those sitting at the table began to yawn, either one by one or all at the same time. Helen flatly refused to be escorted to the hotel. "Don't worry, please. The taxi will take me directly to the place, so there will be no difficulties. As soon as I'm in my room, I'll let you know right away." Sophie said goodbye to Helen as a close relative, with whom they share not only blood ties but also friendship, before getting into taxi. The girl waved to her new acquaintances for a long time, looking out of the window, and did not notice how Boris, who was holding a grudge, was approaching her from a bench installed at the next entrance. The man believed that it was this strange young upstart, whom he saw today, for the first time in his life, who was to blame for the unsuccessful day. Just think, he grabbed it lightly, but it hurt her why she left the house and didn't even think to inform him. It is clear that the matter is unclean. He, as a husband, had every right to teach her how a decent woman should behave. And this little girl, instead of apologizing, began to argue with him, explaining that she had not done anything wrong, so he cut off her oxygen, a little to discourage her. And then, as luck would have it, the evil fury came at the wrong time and hit him on the head with all. Boris touched the back of his head, feeling a painful lump, and continued to think about the insult that he had to endure. Surely everything would not have turned out at all joyfully for the wife and her foolish mother, if not for an unfamiliar face. The devil dared her to end up in their apartment today. The man was sure that without the support of this educated trash, women would not have dared to blather in his direction. Moreover, he would have been able, most likely would have been able to convince the district police officer that the women were conspiring against him. But this young sheep turned out to have a trump card after the intervention of an obviously competent lawyer who knew all the laws. He, Boris, had to leave the apartment as a beggar, although he also has the right to square meters. However, the battle for them is still ahead. In the meantime, we need to deal with these insolent women. Of course, he's now breaking in on his wife and her mother. It's no use. They were probably locked with all the locks and a chain. But to lie in wait and teach a lesson, that would be right. It was for this reason that Boris sat on the bench, sort of like a predator in ambush, waiting for Sophie to see when the defenseless sheep leaves the herd and finds itself in his power. The man even laughed and was glad that he had found such a comparison. But the wait dragged on. The autumn evening, gentle and merciless, had already begun to hint that the planned hunt would not take place. Boris was trembling, either from suppressed rage or from hunger and cold, and was about to leave. But then the entrance door opened and a girl jumped out into the street. Boris's joy was somewhat premature because the impudent sheep climbed into the taxi. But this only provoked the man. The chase is the chase. Luckily, the cars are nearby. In the meantime, heavy traffic in the city will not allow the future victim to disappear from view. Helen had already grabbed the door handle to the hotel, dreaming of quickly collapsing on the bed and getting some sleep. But she heard a voice behind her. The girl automatically turned around and lost precious fractions of a second. Boris, whose voice she recognized very well, was rapidly approaching her. Helen turned away and, trying to quickly get into the hotel, out of fear began to push the doors in the wrong direction. When finally salvation was close, the man grabbed her by the waist, turned her to face him, and began to threaten her in a falsely affectionate tone. "Where were you in such a hurry? Explain to me, why the hell are you interfering in my family life? Why are you silent, sheep? Who asked you to intervene?" The girl prepared to scream loudly and wondered how to free herself. But I didn't have to look for salvation on my own. She could not see how a district police officer, who was already in civilian clothes, appeared from the slightly open door behind her, but she was incredibly happy when she heard, "Boris, you are completely wrong now. Let the girl go." There were steely notes in the policeman's voice, and Boris instantly loosened his grip and made excuses to the district police officer. "I just came to talk." Then I thought of inviting him for a walk and showing him the city. The policeman, leaving the hotel, asked, "Helen, if you don't mind, wait for me in the foyer. I need to agree on something with Boris." Helen sat down in a comfortable chair. A few minutes later, a local police officer sat down next to him and admitted, "I actually came to see you. My parents immediately lost peace when they saw the apples. They asked me to come to an agreement with you about the cuttings. His father wants to vaccinate him and try to grow such beauty too. And I can't count how many times the markets have cheated with varieties. The picture shows one thing, but what emerges is something completely different. So I came here to the hotel. And as it turns out, it's not in vain." The girl smiled. She liked this young and somehow very correct and principled policeman. In gratitude for her salvation, she promised him to send as many Sherenkov as she wanted when she got to her grandfather 2 houses away. They exchanged contacts and said goodbye. The man did not want to part with the charming girl, but he could no longer find any reason to stay close to her. It seems that it was not in vain that Grandfather George sent me to look for Sophie in my dreams. He also advised me to take apples with me. Events after meeting the relatives began to develop with frightening speed. Sophie divorced Boris, and after exchanging the apartment, they moved at the invitation of Michael to his father's house. The man suggested from the bottom of his heart, "Since I am aware of my mother's guilt, let this house be at least a small compensation for all your suffering," and sat for a long time by the apple tree, carefully grown by his loved one, stroking it like a living creature. And Helen, who was always a welcome guest, was glad that the elderly woman, although belatedly, had found peace. In the personal life of the granddaughter, the glossy fruits of the airport also played an important role. Correspondence and regular telephone conversations with Sergio, that policeman, helped to find out that their sympathy is mutual and does not weaken over time, but even becomes stronger. Soon the lieutenant moved to the city to live with his girlfriend, explaining, "Well, our police required everywhere, and if necessary, I can master another profession." Sophie also found her personal happiness when she met a man in a new city. Dana, stroking the apple tree, quietly whispered, "Thank you, George. I know for sure that it was you who helped arrange everything so successfully."